Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where the marble columns of Rome hold a lot more secrets than the textbooks ever bother to mention. You've probably seen pictures of the Roman Senate, stern men in togas, debating the fate of the empire with all the seriousness of a courtroom drama. But yeah, that's only one side of the story. When the lamps burned low and the doors were bolted, let's just say the Senate wasn't always about law and order. Sometimes it was about flamingo tongues, endless goblets of wine, whispered conspiracies, and orgies so wild you'd swear Bacchus himself RSVP'd. And quick reality check. If you were actually there, you probably wouldn't survive this little adventure. Between the diseases, the poison slipped into cups, and the very real possibility of getting caught in the wrong senator's scheme, you'd be lucky to make it home with all your organs still intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and the time down below. I always love knowing where you guys are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The evening begins with a scroll. It's tied with purple ribbon, a mark you don't usually see unless the sender has serious power. When you crack it open, the wax seal breaks with a snap, and the thin message inside is short. A banquet, tonight. Attendance expected. No details, no location spelled out. Just an emblem of a certain senator's household, one known for his flamboyant feasts. Already your stomach knots a little, because in Rome, an invitation like this isn't really optional. Refuse, and you risk offending someone whose word could crush your career. Accept, and you risk much worse, being remembered for what you did there, or didn't do. You picture yourself strolling through the streets of the Eternal City at dusk. The sky glows purple and gold, washing over tiled rooftops and temple spires. The air smells of olives frying in oil, mingled with less pleasant scents of open sewers and animal pens. You pass torchbearers guiding nobles in their litters, their pale feet sticking out from silk cushions. Beggars tug at your toga hem, children dart through alleys with stolen bread, and the hum of a city of 1,000,000 souls pulses around you. Rome never sleeps, but tonight you're slipping into its more secret rhythms. At the gates of the senator's villa, torches blaze like a beacon. Marble lions glare down from the step, their eyes catching flickers of firelight. Slaves in spotless white tunics bow, ushering you past the threshold with the kind of silence that suggests they've been trained to forget whatever horrors they've seen. The villa itself is massive. Frescoes of gods in mid-embrace cover the walls, their painted eyes following you as though daring you to blush. Gold leaf trim glitters under the lamplight, and the air is thick with incense, almost choking in its sweetness. You can tell this isn't just a dinner. It's theatre. It's spectacle. And you've already taken your seat in the audience. The Romans had a word for this blend of dinner and decadence, a convivium. On paper it was just a banquet. But historians still debate what those feasts really looked like once the doors closed. Some argue that tales of orgies and cruelty were exaggerated by enemies of Rome or later Christian writers who wanted to make pagan Rome look like a cautionary tale. Others believe the stories don't even scratch the surface, that senators and emperors alike indulged in acts too wild to record without scandalizing the reader. The truth? Probably somewhere between, but the whispers, the forbidden rumors, are what survive best. One detail is undeniable. Roman invitations like this were meant to display power. Imagine a table groaning under silver platters, not because anyone's hungry, but because it shows how much wealth you can casually waste. Tonight's scroll is proof you're considered worthy enough, or disposable enough, to witness it. A strange comfort, right? Like being handed a front row ticket to a fireworks show that might end in an explosion. As you move deeper into the villa, the floor beneath your sandals shifts to mosaics so fine they practically shimmer like woven cloth. They show mythical feasts of the gods, Apollo plucking his lyre, Venus reclining with Mars, Bacchus stumbling in with his leopards. It's not subtle. Every tile screams, we dine like the gods themselves, and so should you. And here's a quirky fact to tuck away. While these feasts were legendary for their gluttony, the first course of the night often wasn't food at all, but conversation. Guests reclined on couches arranged in a horseshoe, sipping watered wine while testing the air with gossip. Who was rising in power? Who was falling out of favour? Who might be plotting a coup? It's almost like the appetizers were just political manoeuvres disguised as small talk. You glance around and realise, yes, you're already part of the menu. Not the main dish, but still something to be consumed. By now, the host himself has emerged. Draped in a toga edged with Tyrian purple, his face flushed with pride, and maybe early sips of Falernian wine, he greets each guest with a booming voice that fills the marble chamber. You notice his ring, heavy gold carved with the eagle of Rome, and the way he never quite meets anyone's eyes. That, you realise, is the trick of survival in Roman politics. Keep everyone close, but never close enough to stab you in the dark. The scroll, the torches, the walls painted with lovers and gods, it's all prelude. The real play hasn't even started. You're just settling onto a cushioned couch, sandals slipping off your feet, when the first tray of delicacies enters the room. And from that moment on, the night begins to spin in directions you can't yet imagine. The couch is softer than you expected, stuffed with wool and draped in crimson fabric that smells faintly of myrrh. Slaves glide across the room in choreographed silence, their bare feet making almost no sound on the mosaics. Each one carries something glittering: silver bowls of olives, platters of figs still wet with honey, baskets of steaming bread dusted with poppy seeds. You glance around, realizing that the feast itself is only a disguise, a mask for the other reasons everyone has gathered here. Nobody came because they were hungry. They came because stepping into this villa means stepping behind the curtain of Roman politics. As you cross the threshold into the triclinium, the dining hall, you feel the mood shift. Outside, Rome roars with carts and shouting vendors, the stench of manure and fish guts hanging in the heat. Inside, it's all perfumed air and calculated indulgence. The triclinium has been designed to overwhelm, walls painted with red cinnabar that cost more than a soldier's yearly wage. Golden candelabras rising like miniature trees, their flames trembling and making shadows dance across painted gods. At the centre sits a massive table, low to the ground, surrounded on three sides by couches so that the senators may recline while slaves scuttle in and out of the open fourth side. The effect is deliberate. You're meant to feel like you've crossed a sacred threshold, leaving the mortal city behind for something more dangerous. It's not just the food that waits for you here. Everyone has secrets hidden under their togas, and the villa has become a vault where they're temporarily unlocked. Senators who argue with furious dignity in the forum by day now lean back in comfort. Their sandals kicked aside, their faces softened with wine and candlelight. The whisper of silk as courtesans pass, the sudden burst of laughter from a corner, the hiss of incense from a bronze burner, all of it covers over the quiet rustle of plans being made. You realise that every movement here, from the way a senator raises his goblet to the way a slave pours the wine, is a kind of code. The Romans loved codes, after all. Historical records tell us about dinner invitations written with clever riddles, menus composed as jokes, and even games where guests had to decode phrases hidden in the way dishes were served. Tonight, though, the code is sharper, deadlier. Who's sitting close to the host? Who's been placed far away, practically exiled to the edge of the room? Whose goblet is always refilled first? All these details whisper truths about alliances and betrayals that words alone would never dare. A curious detail for you: the Romans had a superstition about doorways. To step across one was to step from one world into another, and many households placed protective charms over their thresholds. Phallic amulets, painted eyes, carved faces of gods. You noticed one carved above the villa's doorway, Priapus, half smirking, half menacing, daring you to leave shame at the door. And isn't that exactly what the Senate is doing tonight? For the next few hours, they aren't lawmakers. They're revelers, schemers, conspirators, and predators all. Slaves bring out platters of mullets and eels swimming in rich sauce, but you notice the food is less important than the way it's presented. A senator nudges you, chuckling as a roasted pig is carried in, stuffed with sausages that spill out like intestines when sliced open. It's both grotesque and fascinating, a theatrical performance in edible form. That's the Roman trick: food as spectacle, food as metaphor. Tonight, they're not just eating, they're displaying power through taste, daring you to be shocked and amused in equal measure. Here's where the scholarly debates come in. Did these feasts really happen as extravagantly as later writers described? Some historians argue the stories of orgies and grotesque dining were exaggerated, part of moralizing tales about decadence leading to Rome's downfall. Others point to archaeological finds, fish sauce vats, banquet halls decorated with erotic frescoes, piles of animal bones from exotic species, as proof that the stories had at least some truth. A peacock skeleton doesn't lie, after all. The problem is, history was often written by enemies, and if you wanted to discredit a senator, accusing him of outrageous feasts was an easy tactic, which means we, standing in this villa tonight, are wading somewhere between propaganda and memory. Still, no exaggeration is needed to feel the tension. Reclining near you, one senator whispers into another's ear, their laughter ringing a bit too loudly to be sincere. Across the room, a courtesan adjusts the folds of her silk gown, her ankle bracelet chiming as she shifts closer to her chosen companion. You notice how the torches flare higher as slaves adjust the oil, throwing fresh shadows across the chamber. The air grows thicker, almost humid, with the mix of perfumes, roasted meats, and too many bodies crowded into one space. It's no longer just a dinner, it's a stage, and you've stepped into the middle of the play. You lean back against your cushion, trying to relax as expected, but it's impossible not to notice the danger. This isn't just about indulgence, it's about masks. Who you laugh with, who you drink with, who you share a dish with. All of it can make or break your future. Rome has no patience for the timid, and neither does this villa. So you swallow the wine that's been poured into your goblet, hoping it's not laced with something bitter, and brace yourself for the night ahead. Because crossing the threshold wasn't the end of the test, it was only the beginning. The first round of trays arrives with a kind of choreographed drama, as though the slaves have rehearsed this moment 100 times. They carry platters high above their heads, gleaming under the torchlight, the aromas weaving through the air and tightening everyone's focus. What lands on the tables isn't bread and olives anymore. It's something altogether stranger, appetizers meant to shock, not to satisfy. You lean forward, curiosity outweighing caution, and there it is. Tiny birds roasted whole, their beaks still intact, lying in neat rows like ornaments. A senator beside you plucks one up, crunches through bone, and grins with grease shining on his lips as if daring you to flinch. The Romans loved beginnings that screamed excess. Dormice appear, stuffed with minced pork and herbs, their little bodies crisped and curled. Plates of sea urchins sparkle with salt, their spiny shells cracked open to reveal pale flesh glistening inside. A bowl of oysters sits on crushed ice hauled from the mountain snow, proof that no distance or expense was too great to bring novelty to the table. You realise none of these dishes were chosen for taste alone. They are a performance of power. If you can eat the rarest, strangest things, you must be a man of influence. And if you refuse, well, that's its own kind of insult. One curious fact, the ancient writer Petronius, in his bawdy satire Satyricon, described a feast where dishes were arranged to mimic the zodiac. Sausages shaped like rams for Aries, and pastries made into the likeness of Scorpios. It sounds absurd, but it's exactly the kind of humour Rome adored, blending food, mythology and mockery in one obscene display. Scholars still argue whether Satyricon was exaggeration or eyewitness account, but sitting here with your goblet of wine and plate of dormice, the line between parody and reality feels dangerously thin. Across the table, a senator dips a slice of honey-soaked melon into pungent fish sauce, then eats it with delight. The combination makes your stomach churn, but no one blinks. It's considered sophisticated, palate that dares to blend opposites. The courtesans perched on the couches sip delicately at their wine, laughing with the lightness of someone who knows exactly how to keep a senator leaning closer. Politics drifts under the surface of every giggle. This isn't a dining hall, it's a marketplace of alliances, where favours are bartered with morsels of exotic flesh. A quirkier detail, flamingo tongues. Yes, those were considered a delicacy by some of the elite, prized for their rarity and the faint tang of their taste. Whether the senators truly devoured them by the plateful, or whether it was more symbolic, I can waste this creature's life for my pleasure, is debated. Still, ancient texts insist they were served. You glance at one of the platters and wonder if the small pink strips piled there are exactly that. The room hums with chatter, punctuated by bursts of laughter whenever a senator tells some bawdy story. One man describes in alarming detail a prank involving a roasted goose stuffed with live sparrows that burst free when cut open, startling the guests. Everyone roars with amusement, though you can't help but wonder if he's boasting about something he actually did or just retelling a legend. That's the Roman style. Blur the line between fact and performance until no one can call you a liar without ruining the mood. You find yourself tasting cautiously. The honeyed figs melt on your tongue, the oysters are briny and fresh, and against your better instincts, the dormouse actually isn't terrible. The crunch gives way to soft, seasoned meat, and for a fleeting moment, you understand how power could taste this way, foreign, forbidden, and almost addictive. But the unease doesn't leave. You're aware that you're being watched. Every bite you take is noticed, every reaction filed away. If you recoil, it marks you as provincial. If you eat greedily, it marks you as easy to manipulate. The senators, you realise, are not only feasting on food tonight, they're feasting on each other's weaknesses. There's also a debate among scholars about whether Roman feasts truly reached such extremes every time, or if these were rare spectacles reserved for the richest of the rich. Some argue that most senators ate far simpler meals, and that the legends of flamingo tongues and gilded bread were exaggerated to vilify them later. Others counter that Rome's wealth was so obscene by the 1st century CE that even exaggeration might not capture the reality. You sit in this villa, looking at platters piled with more food than 100 peasants might see in a month, and think, if this is exaggeration, it's doing a very convincing job. The appetizers keep arriving. Each new dish feels stranger than the last. Sausages shaped like little men, loaves of bread dyed with saffron until they glow golden. A roasted peacock served whole, its feathers carefully reattached and fanned out as though the bird had only paused mid-strut. Senators clap, delighted at the absurdity, while slaves shuffle past with pitchers of wine, refilling goblets before they're even half empty. The air grows warmer, laughter louder, and inhibitions thinner. It's no longer just about food, it's about opening the floodgates. And you, sitting amid it all, realise that this is only the overture. The real excess hasn't even begun. These appetizers are the soft knock at the door before the storm crashes through. The taste of honey and fish sauce lingers on your tongue, and you can't shake the feeling that you've just swallowed more than food. You've swallowed your way deeper into the dangerous theatre of Roman power. The wine arrives like a tide you can't outrun, amber, ruby, almost black in the torchlight, cradled in clay amphorae sealed with wax, and a dab of pitch that smells faintly of pine. Slaves tilt each vessel toward the great mixing bowl at the centre, the crater, and you hear the thick glug-glug as Falernian and Kekibon spill into the bronze. Then comes the water, cool and careful, ladled with ceremony, steam threading upward where snowmelt kisses sunburned grape. It's not generosity, it's control. There's a man appointed to this balance, the arbiter, Bibendi, the drinking judge. And tonight he lifts a ladle, tastes and nods. This is the Roman way. Wine is never drunk neat unless someone is making a point, and you can feel the point sharpening all around you. Your goblet is heavy, its stem cool against your thumb. When the slave pours, the surface trembles with tiny rings, and the smell rushes up. A sweet, figgy warmth with a resin edge that clings to your tongue just by breathing it in. Someone behind you brags that the host has tapped a jar from the famed Opimian year, a vintage old enough to have its own stories and grudges. True or not, it works. The room leans forward together. A whole flock of senators turned wine sniffers, noses hovering above the cups like priests over censers. You catch yourself doing it too, because that's the trick of the place. You imitate the mood or risk becoming the joke. Strong, the man to your left murmurs, peering into his goblet as if it might whisper policy ideas back. He wants us generous, and he's right. Thicker pour, thinner scruples. You remember the stuffed dormice, the peacock with its reattached feathers, the honey and fish sauce comedy you just survived? Those were the openers, the brag. The wine is the lever. The servers make their rounds. The cups never lie flat. A slave refills mid-sentence. Another tops you off when you're merely gesturing. Your protests dissolve into smiles. Refusals are impolite here, and politeness can be as deadly as poison. And speaking of poison, a quiet man near the host sips first from every new jug. Praegustator. The taster. His job as obvious as it is terrifying. He wipes his mouth with linen, waits a breath you can count to 5 with, and then nods minutely. The cups resume their circuit. You, who were feeling bold a minute ago, swallow harder than you intended. In a room where a misplaced adjective can end your career, a drop too many of the wrong thing could end everything else. A chorus of toasts begins, building into a habit. To health, to the gods, to absent friends, to victories tomorrow, that will be explained by the flattery traded tonight. The wine loosens the hinges on every jaw. You watch an old rival smile with all his teeth and compliment a man he despises so thoroughly that his slaves already avoid passing each other in the street. The compliment sticks anyway, like gold leaf patted onto wet plaster. That's the magic of a generous blend. Historical fact for the night, tucked right between your sips, the Romans formalised this part of dinner as its own ritual, the commissatio. The food painted the stage, the drinking was the play. The arbiter bibendi decided the ratios, often with a wink at the room's desired temperature of chaos, and the night proceeded by rounds, punctuated by games, songs, and calculated indiscretions. Only barbarians, Romans insisted, drank wine unmixed. Here, at least in theory, there was an art to how you gave yourself away. And there's the wreath on your head now, ivy braided with roses, cool and pleasantly damp where it touches your temples. A slave sets it there without asking. Quirky note you weren't expecting. Many Romans believed garlands like this could stave off drunkenness, that ivy fought the god's grip, that roses softened the morning's punishment. You'd laugh if you weren't already grateful for the excuse to wear something that smells more like a garden than a tavern. The petals brush your ear whenever you turn, a private little fan whispering, "Pace yourself." Sure, across the couches, a courtesan runs a finger along the rim of her cup, listening to the soft singing ring it makes. She tilts her head toward a senator you recognise from the forum, hawk-nosed, tirelessly severe by daylight, and asks a question only he can hear. He answers with a shrug that pretends indifference, but his free hand is already sketching a future in the air, a future that looks suspiciously like a contract coming his way. The servant behind him refills, and his sketch grows bolder. The wine is a rumour turned liquid, and rumours are the true currency in this room. Someone calls for a game, and the arbiter grants it. Dice clatter in a shallow bowl, the throw decides who proposes the next toast and how much each must drink. Laughter sparks, then swells, and you notice that even the host relaxes by a notch, as though the invisible net of obligations he's woven can finally hold without his constant tugging. A server offers you a smaller cup, ostensibly delicate. You remember the priapus carved above the threshold, the warning to leave shame outside and choose the smaller anyway. Bedtime pace, you tell yourself. Slow wave, long beach. The amphorae keep coming, wax like broken seals on letters from the past. One arrives with a chalked fish on its shoulder, a cellar mark. The smell is different, spiced, warmer. You take a cautious sip and find honey threaded with pepper and a whisper of saffron. Conditum, someone says. Sweetened wine. A favourite when the night wants to pretend it's a festival. It's dangerously easy, the kind that sneaks past resistance, with all the charm of a practiced liar. You let it sit in your mouth, tasting dates and heat, and think, this is how people agree to things they argued against at noon. The scholarly debate drifts into your thoughts uninvited, the way second-hand worries do when the room tilts. Did Romans poison themselves by sweetening wine and musting kettles lined with lead? Some argue that the syrup sapper carried a slow, sweet harm into elite bodies, blurring minds, thinning bones, unspooling futures. Others counter that the jalousies were too small, the exposure too uneven, that blaming the Empire's faults on a kitchen habit is tidy but unlikely. You look around at men who hold the levers of provinces in their ringed hands and wonder what invisible chemistry is holding their moods in place. Tonight, at least, the main ingredient is intent. The host raises his cup. For a breath, the room holds still, as quiet as a stage waiting for the drum. To boundaries, he says, playful as a cat looking at a birdcage. And the laughter that follows tells you everyone heard the sarcasm. The goblets lift, the wine flares in the candelabras, and then another round slips through the bets. You catch a hint of smoke from the torches and something almost floral wafting from the amphorae. A rumour circulates that one of the vintages has been perfumed with violets. The idea is ridiculous, irresistible, perfectly on brand. The Romans have never met a boundary they didn't want to treat as a dare. A man near the foot of the table claims the Falernian will ignite if you bring a flame to it. His eyes are light with the threat of a demonstration. Nobody indulges him, but his breathless audience doesn't care whether the tale is true. That's the point here. Wine stretches stories the way water stretches wine, and truth is just another guest, sometimes seated near the door. You sip, listen, file away the faces leaning too hard into the myth. Soft-faced musicians appear in the doorway, flutist, lyre player, waiting for their cue like patient house cats. The arbiter tastes again, recalibrates the dilution fraction with a director's nod, and the third round begins. It's stronger now, a little, the edges fuzzier. The corners of the room more forgiving. Conversation knits into a brighter fabric. A veteran of some dusty frontier tells a self-deprecating story, gets the laugh he aimed for, and throws a glance at a younger man who could make or break his retirement. Your neighbour mutters something about the Senate debating corn dolls in the morning, and then immediately reels it back into a compliment about the host's mosaics. The floor glows like a map of constellations anyhow. Dolphins, grapes, gods with sly smiles, and in a slow blink you realise you haven't thought about the street's stink in an hour. You are warm, crowned, and coached by the tide of the room. You remember the threshold under Priapus's smirk, the peacock's impossible tail, the first crunch of dormouse, and think how cleverly the steps have been arranged. You didn't trip, the stairs simply carried you down. A slave shadows you with a jug and eyes that see everything. He leans without intruding, coaxes without pressing. Somewhere another guest starts a hymn to Bacchus under his breath, the melody rippling through the cushions like a breeze through tall grain. Then, as if on cue, the first low note of the flute threads the air. Soft, silver, almost apologetic. A lyre answers, lazy as twilight. The cups pause in mid-air, a synchronized hesitation, and the arbiter Bebendi smiles like a stagehand flicking a switch. The wine has done its work. Tongues have loosened, masks have slipped a finger. You settle against the cushion, the ivy tickling your cheek, and feel the room tilt toward rhythm. The night shifts gear so gently you barely notice, but the sound tells you where you're headed next. The music begins softly enough that you almost mistake it for the sighing of the torches. A single flute note floats into the air, sliding like silk over the chatter of the hall, and a plucked string follows, tentative like a toe dipping into water. The room adjusts around it without anyone saying a word. Voices lower, laughter grows measured, and then the melodies weave together into something smoother, slyer, something meant to guide you out of the world of bread and dormice and into another place altogether. Rome knew this trick well. If the wine cracked the doors of restraint, music was the hand that pushed them wide open. The musicians enter slowly, barefoot, their eyes downcast in deference. One cradles a lyre, another a curved flute polished so bright it catches the candlelight. Another taps gently at a drum covered in stretched hide. Their clothes are simple, but their movements precise. They take their places in the corner like actors stepping into a role, and with the first soft pulse of rhythm the entire banquet reshapes itself. This isn't background music, this is scaffolding. The room will climb higher on these notes. Your goblet rests against your palm, warm now from constant refills. Each sip makes the flute sound a little sweeter, the lyre's vibration a little more insistent. Senators who spoke in clipped tones before now laugh more freely, their hands waving wider arcs through the perfumed air. A woman's bracelets chime in time with the drummer as she leans forward, whispering into a man's ear. He throws his head back, roaring with laughter, though you're not sure whether he heard a joke or simply needed the excuse to look carefree. Here's your historical fact. Roman banquets often employed not only musicians but full ensembles of performers, singers, dancers, even acrobats, to keep the energy from flagging. Music was medicine for appetite and courage both. Pliny the Younger once grumbled that musicians at some dinners drowned out the very conversations the banquets were supposed to foster. Tonight, though, the balance is perfect. Just enough volume to soften secrets, just enough rhythm to make shoulders sway against silk cushions. A senator across the couch slaps the drumskin with his palm, laughing as though he were a boy again. The musician humours him, weaving his offbeat thumps into the rhythm until the whole room claps along. Fingers drum on goblets, toes tap against mosaic dolphins. The host smiles proudly, knowing that he has orchestrated this crescendo without lifting a finger. That's the point. In Rome, to control the mood of a gathering was to control the fates of men. There's a quirkier note too. Some Romans believed music carried divine presence, especially flutes and drums tied to Bacchus, god of wine and frenzy. Scholars debate whether the Senate truly believed Bacchus visited their parties or whether invoking him was just a theatrical wink at indulgence. Tonight, though, when the flute trills high and sudden, a few senators raise their cups instinctively, saluting the invisible guest as if they are not willing to risk impiety by ignoring him. Whether they believe or just play along doesn't matter. The god has been invited, and his shadow stretches over the couches. The atmosphere grows heavier, thicker, not unpleasant, but more like velvet draped across your shoulders. Every sound seems amplified, the scrape of a goblet against silver, the hiss of a torch, the deep inhale of a man drawing breath to tell his story. And then the stories tumble out, flowing in rhythm with the lyre, boasts of past battles, outrageous sexual escapades. Slander whispered so loudly you wonder if it's meant to be overheard. The wine loosened the gates, but the music drives the floodwaters through. A scholarly debate sneaks in at the edges of your thoughts. Were these musical interludes just entertainment, or did they carry something ritualistic, almost religious? Some historians suggest the blending of music, wine and feasting was a secularized echo of earlier mystery rites, particularly the suppressed Bacchic cults that Rome had outlawed in scandalized terror. Others insist it was nothing mystical, just good party planning. But sitting here, your pulse beating along with the drum, your breath matching the flute's rise and fall, you wonder if ritual and entertainment were ever truly separate. The lyre player shifts his melody into something playful, almost mocking, and suddenly two courtesans rise from their couches. Their silk gowns shimmer as they move into the open space, bare feet whispering against the floor. They sway, arms curling above their heads, fingers beckoning invisible companions. The senators cheer, slapping their thighs, some tossing rings or coins onto the floor in appreciation. The dancers laugh, weaving the wealth into their movements, and the music grows bolder, faster, until you feel it humming in your bones. You can sense the change in yourself too. At first you were the careful guest, wary of every bite and sip. Now your head tilts with the rhythm, your foot taps, and you find yourself grinning at a senator you barely know. The boundaries you carried in with you, dignity, caution, restraint, slip off like sandals at the door. It's easier to talk now, easier to lean closer, easier to laugh at jokes that aren't really funny. The music has you under its spell as surely as it does everyone else. But beneath the ease lies tension. You can see it in the way one senator stares too long at another, the way a courtesan presses closer than etiquette technically allows, the way the host himself smiles just a little too wide. The music may soften the edges, but it also sharpens desires. Desire for power, for bodies, for influence. Rome doesn't really do relaxing background music. Rome does preludes to chaos. The flute climbs higher, the lyre strums harder, the drum kicks like a heartbeat doubled. The room leans into it, swaying together like a single body. The senators shout their toast louder, the courtesans laugh brighter, the host lifts his hands as though conducting the entire scene. And you realise the feast has shifted. The food was display, the wine was persuasion, but the music? The music is ignition. The night has truly begun. The first notes of the dancers are still quivering in the air when a new wave of motion stirs at the edge of the hall. Curtains part and in glide the courtesans, silk flowing, anklets chiming, hair oiled, until it gleams like bronze under the torchlight. They arrive in twos and threes, smiling as if they've just stepped out of some myth painted on the walls. The senators, who moments before were content with oysters and bawdy jokes, shift in their couches like restless lions. It's an old Roman paradox. The very men who thunder against corruption in the forum are the same ones whose eyes widen now, drinking in every curve and glint of gold. The courtesans are not slaves, not exactly, but neither are they free in the same sense as the senators who recline before them. They're professionals, artists of the body, skilled not only in movement but in conversation. Rome's elite prized them like rare wines, imported from Greece, Egypt or Asia Minor, trained to sing, recite poetry or play instruments in addition to their obvious roles. One of them, trailing a scent of cinnamon and roses, bends to whisper a quip into a senator's ear, and he laughs with such sudden warmth you'd think she'd told him a state secret rather than a joke. Historical fact for you, Roman society was fiercely divided about women at feasts. Respectable matrons were usually excluded, expected to guard the household's reputation from the safety of their own atrium. To be seen reclining at dinner beside men was scandalous, unless you were a courtesan. These women became symbols of both luxury and vice, celebrated for their wit as much as their beauty, yet also condemned by moralists as proof that Rome was rotting from the inside out. Some, like the famous Volumnia Cytheris, even earned names recorded by history. She was once a slave, became an actress, and ended up the companion of generals and senators alike. Imagine the whispers in the forum when she showed up to a banquet like this. The host claps his hands, and the music dips lower, softer, more languid. The courtesans weave among the couches, trailing fingertips across shoulders, laughing lightly at Senator's half-slurred compliments. One balances a goblet on her palm while turning a circle, the wine trembling but never spilling, her gaze locked with a man old enough to be her grandfather. He looks like he might weep from admiration. You realise this is theatre layered on theatre. The food was a spectacle, the wine a persuasion, and now the courtesans arrive as both reward and temptation. A quirky fact, Romans adored perfume almost to the point of obsession, importing oils from Arabia and India. Courtesans often wore fragrances designed to fill the air as they passed, creating a sort of scented aura that lingered in memory long after the night ended. Some even perfumed their hair with saffron so that every toss released a little burst of exotic spice. Tonight, the air in the villa is heavy with that same haze, roses, myrrh, cinnamon, and beneath it all the musk of too many bodies pressed close. Not everyone is charmed, though. In the far corner you spot two senators exchanging tight, sour looks, their lips barely moving. They pretend to watch the dancers, but their conversation is far from flirtatious. Maybe they're muttering about alliances, or maybe they're condemning the very decadence they sit in. That's the paradox again. Indulgence doesn't erase rivalry, it disguises it. The courtesans are both a balm and a battlefield, luring men into revealing more than they should while convincing them it's all just part of the fun. Scholarly debate lingers here too. Some claim the accounts of courtesans at senatorial feasts are exaggerated, coloured by the later Christian writers eager to paint Rome as a pit of sin. Others argue that the archaeological evidence, frescoes of banquets with reclining women, inscriptions praising courtesans' wit, suggests the stories were grounded in reality. Maybe the truth is that Rome was simply inconsistent, as all great powers are, scandalising itself while secretly savouring the scandal. One of the courtesans pauses beside you, her anklet bells chiming softly. She leans close enough that her perfume clouds your head, and she asks your name as if it matters deeply. Her smile is rehearsed yet feels uncannily genuine, and for a moment you forget the danger of speaking too freely. Before you answer, she touches your cup, tilts it just slightly, and the slave behind her fills it again. Her wink tells you this is no accident. The wine isn't just flowing, it's being directed, targeted, orchestrated. The music swells again, quicker now. Two courtesans spin together, their silks flaring like wings, laughter spilling from their lips. The senators cheer, tossing coins that clatter against the mosaic floor. A bearded man near the centre reaches out and pulls one dancer into his lap. She squeals theatrically, feigning protest before melting into his embrace, and the room erupts in applause. The boundary between performance and reality has all but dissolved. Your own pulse matches the beat of the drum. You can feel the heat of the room settling into your skin, the torches smoking a little heavier, the incense mixing with sweat and perfume until you can't separate one from the other. The courtesans move like extensions of the music, weaving through the crowd, stoking desires that were already simmering. Around you, senators lean closer, their voices lower, their hands less restrained. This is no longer just a banquet. This is a negotiation conducted in whispers and glances, with courtesans as both witnesses and participants. You recline deeper into your couch, ivy crown slipping slightly askew, and realise that the night has shifted again. The courtesans have arrived not just to entertain, but to blur the line between politics and pleasure, to remind everyone here that the Senate's power is as much about seduction as it is about law. And with that realisation, you take another sip of your wine, tasting roses and soak, and surrender a little more to the rhythm of the night. The music threads through the room like a sly river, and you can feel men you've seen thunder in the forum begin to soften, slacken, and tilt toward their truer angles. Hawknose, the one who lectures about discipline so hard you can hear his vowels grind, lets a courtesan trace a figure 8 on his forearm with a fingertip. Marble Smile, whose teeth have never once been spotted without a legal opinion between them, is laughing, actually laughing, at a bawdy pun so old the lyre player mouths the punchline in advance. The host lounges higher on his cushion, content as a spider who knows the web is working. This is the moment when senators unmask without ever touching their faces, when the public marble crumbles just enough to show warm clay beneath. Games slip into the space between cups. A bowl of knucklebones, astragala, arrives with the olives as if it had always been invited, and a quick-witted courtesan suggests a rule. High throw asks a question, low throw must answer, or drink. The arbiter Bebendi approves with a tilt of his ladle. Dice clatter, laughter spikes, and suddenly the most powerful men in the city are trading secrets the way children trade pebbles. How much does your villa in Baiae cost to heat? Which poet writes your speeches? Which ally is only an ally as long as the cash flows? The questions flash bright and quick, but you can feel the heat under them. Hawknose throws high, leans toward Marble Smile and asks where he will plant his standard when the grain vote comes. Rome? Or the provinces? Marble Smile swirls his wine, pauses just long enough to be noticed, and then dodges with a joke about preferring vineyards to wheat. He drinks as the table groans, a penalty acknowledged. But the tiny pause mattered. A freedman will carry the word of that pause to a rival breakfast tomorrow. Your own throw clatters short and ugly. You accept your swallow, the sweet spiced conditum from earlier. And remember to smile. It's not truth or dare. It's truth and dare, with consequences that grow roots. Across the room, an older senator known for piety, call him Laurel Wreath because he wears virtue like headgear, rests his hand where propriety says it shouldn't be. The courtesan doesn't flinch. She leans closer and recites 2 lines of Callimachus in a breath soft enough to count as air. He closes his eyes like a man in a temple. You file it away, not as scandal. Everyone here is scandal, that's the point. But as calibration. By daylight, Laurel Wreath will wag his finger at impudence. By lamplight, he will purchase it with poetry. A slave with clever eyes, one of the silent ones who never trips, appears at your elbow with a dish you don't remember ordering. It's rabbit with pepper and lovage, steam feathering into the torchlight, perfectly timed to interrupt the question that was about to land in your lap. You glance at the host. He isn't looking, which means he's watching you in the correct way, without eyes. Favour, shield, leash, 1 plate, 3 meanings. You cut a bite you don't taste and ride the change of subject like a man hugging a plank in surf. Historical fact to anchor the drift. Rome tried repeatedly to chain knights like this. Sumptuary laws, Lex Orcia, Lex Fania, Lex Didia, once limited how many guests you could invite, what you could spend, even which meats could appear. On paper, modesty won. In villas like this, modesty learned to put on perfume and get past the doorman. The laws still float in the air like distant civic incense. The host's very extravagance is a speech about how little paper matters compared to power. A senator with silver in his beard, silver fox, quick smile, quicker temper, loses the dice and must answer a question that cuts closer than courtesy. Who funded his last campaign for the quaestorship? He toys with the wreath in his hair, glances at the host and admits, voice even, that a neighbour with a taste for marble chipped in. Everyone laughs. Everyone hears the name he didn't say. Somewhere a ledger grows wings. The courtesan beside Silver Fox presses her knee against his for a heartbeat, long enough to be seen by exactly 2 people, him and the man who asked. That's influence's favourite unit of time. Quirky fact sidling into the candle glow. The senator's shoes, calci senatoriae, usually bear a tiny crescent, a lunate ornament, and they lace up the ankle with 4 thongs. Tonight those red-dyed shoes sit in tidy rows by the walls like well-behaved dogs. There's something faintly comic about it, an entire chamber of rulers barefoot like boys at the baths, toes flexing on peacock feather mosaics, while they barter away governorships and grudges. The scent of leather lingers under the stronger perfumes, a reminder of the street outside that has been politely dismissed for the evening. The courtesans steer as adroitly as any arbiter. One takes a senator's signet ring, heavy gold, eagle carved deep, and kisses it, then flips it back to him after rubbing a smudge from the stone. That brief disappearance would make any man touch his fingers to phantom weight. He does. Another flicks a look at Laurel Wreath's cup. A slave reads that look and thins the wine by a breath enough to bring piety back to shore. You start to understand not all unmasking is collapse. Sometimes it's adjustment, a gradual lowering of armour by skilled hands. The open scholarly debate drifts in like a draft through a hidden seam. How much of what is happening here has always happened? When Cicero railed against Catiline, accusing him of plotting amid nights of debauchery, did he describe a true security threat or sharpen his rhetoric on a favourite whetstone? Elite vice as political cudgel? Some historians warn that our image of senatorial depravity is mostly the product of enemies and moralists. Others argue that archaeology, scandalous letters, and stubborn anecdotes point to a very real and very useful culture of nocturnal negotiation. You sip, listen to Marble Smile offer compromise in the same breath as a compliment to a dancer's ankle, and suspect both sides have a point. The music slides towards the minor notes. Gentle as a cat curling its tail. A musician hums under his breath, a hardly there harmony that makes the torchlight seem thicker. You watch Hawknose touch 2 fingers to the shoulder of a provincial governor as if checking for fever. There will be winter shortages, he says without moving his lips. Rome will need a scapegoat. The governor nods once, a man who just noticed an invisible blade at his ribs. Then we should feed Rome, he answers, with a story. They clink cups. The sound is so small you feel it rather than hear it, like the click of a lock sliding. The host gestures, and a small troupe of mimes appears for a brief ridiculous interlude. Overlarge masks, waggling eyebrows, exaggerated sighs. The room hoots. You snort in spite of yourself because, of course, this is what the gods love. Layers. Men who are not wearing masks applaud men who are, and in the echo between them, truth plays at being shy. You notice the host watching the mime's reflection in a polished silver platter rather than the performers themselves. He wants to see how the room sees. A rumour skitters along the couches, nimble as a lizard. Someone has brought a letter from the east, sealed under 3 cords, with a news pellet inside that could reprice an entire province. You feel the room tilt, every conversation developing a quiet undertow that pulls toward the man rumoured to have the letter. He does not move, which, of course, is a movement. A courtesan settles near him and begins to tell a funny story about a matron and a mango. Half the room pretends not to listen, which means half the room hears everything else. When the next round of Astrogali lands, the question to you is simple in shape, complicated in effect. And you, what do you actually want from tonight? The bones show a low. Answer or drink. You consider the ivy on your temples, the peacock tail fanned like a boast behind the carving of Bacchus, the Priapus over the threshold who promised this exact crossroads. You decide on a middle road. To leave with more friends than stones in my shoes, you say, and you drink anyway. The table chuckles, the tension dissolves by a finger's width, and somewhere, a freedman files away that you can be charming without being concrete. The musicians ease back, letting the conversations carry the rhythm. Your cushion has learned the shape of your shoulder. The slave shadowing you has learned the curve of your thirst. It hits you that the unmasking you were promised doesn't arrive as a spectacle. It arrives as a series of small permissions. A laugh too loud, a glance held too long, a hand placed where it shouldn't be, a future promised without the choreography of the Senate's formal speeches. One by one, the men who rule the world become men who can be ruled. By appetite, by flattery, by fear of being left out. You tilt your cup and catch your reflection in the wine. The wreath askew, the eyes a little glassier, the mouth that remembers its lines. The courtesans drift like patient moons, tugging tides. The host's ring winks in the firelight, and somewhere very softly, a drum suggests a slower beat. The night, warm and oiled, prepares to ask for more. A hush moves through the triclinium like a cool breeze under a hot door. It starts with the musicians, one low note that hangs and fades, and then, with the host raising his hand, palm down, the universal sign for let the next act arrive. Torches are trimmed, the smoke thins, the perfumes settle. Courtesans step back at her pace. The way stars dim when the moon throws her shoulder into the sky. Sacra, the host says lightly, almost a joke, almost not. The word makes the room rearrange itself. Laughter folds, goblets lower, the game of knucklebones goes still mid-rattle. Even Hawknose straightens, smoothing the crease he put into his own dignity. 2 slaves part a curtain and reveal a small shrine tucked into a deep niche. The household gods, the Lares and Penates, painted with big watchful eyes. A bronze snake curls along the base, harmless and gleaming. Little garlands of ivy and laurel have been draped around their necks as if the statues themselves are guests. A boy with careful hands carries in a shallow brazier. Resin pops and sighs on the coals, sending up a thread of sweet smoke that smells like pine sap and promises. A tibia player, the same flautist as before, sidles closer and begins a soft, steady tune. Quirky detail you can't help admiring. Romans often played music during sacrifices to muffle unlucky sounds, dogs barking, someone sneezing, drunk cousins saying the wrong words at the wrong time. They believed the gods liked clean audio. Honestly. Relatable. A small procession enters as if spilled from a painting. A white-fleeced lamb with gilded horns, a piglet ribboned around the belly, and a calf no larger than a stubborn dog. It's a miniaturized suavitaurilia. Pig, sheep, bull, a greatest hits bundle for blessing and purification scaled to a dining room. Laurel Wreath leans in, as if he hadn't already blessed half the city with opinions, and murmurs a line from some old hymn. The host smiles, the kind that says he knows exactly how much ritual to serve with his roast peacock. Historical fact to hold in your palm like a warm coin before any Roman sacrifice. The victim is sprinkled with mola salsa, salted flour. The recipe, hallowed wheat toasted and ground, was the specialty of the Vestal virgins. Even in private homes, a servant imitates their gesture, pinching the powder and letting it fall like snow onto a forehead. Without it, the act isn't technically a sacrifice, it's just violence with extra steps. Tonight, the servant's fingers are steady. The powder dusts the lamb's brow, and somewhere in you, a very old part relaxes at the sight of something done in the correct order. A slave, the Camillus, brings a small bowl of wine. The host tilts, pours a little onto the coals, and the flame answers with a brief golden shrug. "For the lairs," he says, "for the health of friends." The tibia's line warms, the room exhales. The poper, the man with the mallet, steps forward, and you feel your jaw clench for a heartbeat. He is quick, practiced. There is a soft, definitive sound, and the moment passes like a blink. The Cultrarius finishes the work with a blade that flashes once, twice, kept deliberately out of sightlines that don't want details. The coppery edge that rides the air is real but discreet, undercut by cinnamon and wine. Somewhere a courtesan lays a gentle hand on a senator's wrist, and he unclenches his fingers. Theatre knows how to soothe itself. The host gestures, and an Etruscan-looking man in a dark, spotless mantle steps from the wing, like a shadow given a job. Haruspex. He receives a clean silver tray with grave care. There's no gore to gawk at. Instead, there's a practiced ritual of examination, a choreography of fingertips and eyes, a priest reading a map that other people can't see. He lifts something smooth and lobed, kept demurely shielded from most, and hums to himself as if the future has a texture. Your mind flashes, unhelpfully, to that bronze model liver dug up centuries later at Piacenza, etched with the names of gods, a study aid for exactly this. He nods once, a tiny Morse code of omen. "Favourable," the host interprets. "Of course it is. Anything else would have been sent back to the kitchen and asked to try again." A fringe note circles the room like a mischievous sparrow. Someone jokes about fetching the sacred chickens. You can't tell if he means Rome's official omens on drumstick legs or his own domestic flock, trained on breadcrumbs and attention. The table ripples with the story that always follows. The consul who hurled the chickens overboard when they refused to eat. Fine, then let them drink, and sailed straight into defeat. It's as if the anecdote is a charm against hubris. Everyone laughs, everyone glances just briefly at the shrine. Humour bows to fear and calls it friendship. The musicians slide into a hymn to Liber, the more comfortable Roman face of Bacchus, and someone passes little honey cakes, Liber, sticky and perfumed. A courtesan smears a crumb of one onto a senator's lip with a finger and makes a show of wiping it away. The man beams like a boy. You think of the edict centuries ago, the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, the crackdown that painted Bacchic rites as orgies spiked with conspiracy. Open scholarly debate steps up to the couch. Was Livy recording a genuine security panic or crafting a moral horror story to reassure Rome that order had prevailed over chaos? Some researchers suspect exaggeration, even propaganda. Others point to inscriptions, prosecutions, and wary repetitions of the tale as evidence that something dangerous really did wobble the city's balance. Tonight the hymn is tame, domesticated, but you can feel the old rumour breathing under the notes like heat behind a wall. The host lifts a sprig of laurel and wafts it over the brazier, perfuming the smoke with a fresh bitter green. "For boundaries kept and gently crossed," he says, eyes sparkling. The same feline joke from earlier clothed in ritual now. Hawknose watches the Haruspex watch the flame and translates the favourable omen into a coin toss he can use at dawn. Marble Smile, who rarely resists a performance, claps his hands in time with the tibia as if to say, "See? Piety looks good on everyone." A slave refills your cup without looking at you, the perfect ghost. The wine's warmth and the incense tangle, and for a floating moment you feel soft enough to be folded. Under your couch you notice the leg sits on a little square of lead. Odd. Then your mind catches the rumour. Curse tablets, defictions, thin, sheets of lead scratched with names and requests, folded, pierced, hidden where feet would press. Fringe, yes, but not impossible. The city is littered with them in wells and graves, knives made of words. A sensation passes through you like a fingertip drawn along your spine. Is it your name there, or the host's, or the name of a rival whose laughter has sounded suspiciously guiltless all night? You do not check. That is how people live to see breakfast. The tibia drones a little lower. The haruspex murmurs a final formula and disappears as if he had only been borrowed from a painting for a scene. Slaves carry the small bodies away with solemn economy, like stagehands who know the audience would rather not watch the strike. The shrine's coals settle, dark bright, tiny eyes buried in ash. The courtesans step forward again, their anklets chiming you back to earth. Laurel wreath is dabbing at the corner of his eye, sincere, performative both, and Hawknose has already sidled 2 fingers closer to a provincial governor's sleeve. The city's business does not mind sharing a couch with the gods. Another round of toasts rises, softer than before, like pillows being fluffed. The host's voice is velvet. "We are clean," he declares, which is a funny thing to say after everything you've watched. But in this room, meanings bend the way smoke does. You sip, mellow, spiced, politely dangerous, and catch the faintest shift at the edge of the hall, a current moving behind a different curtain. The slave with clever eyes is there, the one who saved you with rabbit and lovage earlier. He inclines his head half an inch, an invitation with a hinge. Your wreath has slipped. You don't fix it. The mosaic dolphins seem to be swimming a little faster. Or maybe you are. Marble Smile is telling a story about a law that died of laughter. Laurel Wreath is promising a temple dedication that will outlive anyone's sins. Hawknose is smiling with only the right side of his mouth, which means a knife is being sharpened somewhere that isn't here. The shrine's smoke curls like a finger, beckoning toward the walls. You set your cup down. The anklets whisper. The tibia purrs. The curtain that hides the farther rooms breathes in and out with the movement of people who pretend they are not moving. When the slave with clever eyes returns to your side, you are already turned in his direction. He doesn't speak, of course. He doesn't need to. He lifts the curtain with 2 fingers, and a cooler darkness spills out, touched with violet light and the scent of crushed myrtle. You step in, because this entire evening has been one long, beautifully arranged step. The curtain falls shut behind you with a whisper of fabric, and instantly the noise of the triclinium drops to a muted hum, like a market square heard through thick walls. The air in this side chamber is cooler, perfumed with myrtle and cedar smoke instead of lamb fat and incense. Torches burn lower here, their flames wrapped in coloured glass, casting violet and green shadows that stretch long and strange across the mosaic floor. You've stepped off the stage of ritual into something more private, a hidden act of the same play. The couches are narrower, arranged in tighter clusters rather than a sweeping horseshoe. Cushions pile high, embroidered with gold thread, as if the furniture itself has reclined to shed its formality. Here, courtesans don't glide like priestesses or dancers. They lounge, sprawl and curl, as though they live in this shadow place full time. A senator you recognise, stern-faced in daylight, is already barefoot on one couch, his wreath askew, a courtesan perched on his lap as he mutters in her ear. She laughs, but her eyes flicker around the room, always watching, always cataloguing. The slave with clever eyes hovers just long enough to make sure you've noticed the rhythm here. Slower, heavier. A pulse under the music that seeps through from the main hall. He tips his chin toward an empty couch, and you sink into it, surprised at how easily the cushions swallow your weight. A goblet appears in your hand before you've even raised it, filled with a darker vintage than before. You taste resin, honey, and something sharp like pepper or cinnamon. It burns less than you expect, almost inviting another sip. Historical fact for grounding. Roman villas often contained smaller, more intimate dining rooms called cubicula triclinia, used for private banquets or after-dinner diversions. Some even had hidden passages leading to gardens or baths. Archaeologists have uncovered frescoes in these spaces, painted scenes of lovers entwined, Dionysian revels and mythological seductions, suggesting that the walls themselves encouraged a slide into indulgence. As you glance up now, the fresco above you is unmistakable. Leda and the swan hand-painted in tender and obscene detail. The god disguised in feathers pressing close to mortal skin. Subtle, Rome was not. The courtesans shift their roles in this chamber. In the hall they were entertainers and co-conspirators. Here they are confidants and confessors. A young senator kneels beside a courtesan, whispering furiously, his voice a hiss of names and numbers. She strokes his hair like a mother soothing a child, nodding as though she understands the stakes of tax grain shipments from Africa. Maybe she does. Many of these women are sharper than the men they drape themselves upon, gathering secrets with each caress, storing them like bees store honey. What they do with those secrets afterward, sell them, trade them, or simply survive on them, is a question only whispered in the corners of Rome. A quirky detail you notice. One courtesan is tattooed and faint ink curling along her inner wrist. It's rare but not unheard of. Slaves, soldiers, gladiators, they wore tattoos as marks of ownership or allegiance. For a courtesan to bear one suggests she came from somewhere rougher than silk-draped chambers. The senator who kisses that wrist probably doesn't care. Or maybe he does and finds the danger thrilling. Either way, the tattoo is like a ghost of another life, another city. Hanging in this room full of borrowed names. Conversations here flow differently than at the long couches outside. There, words were currency flung across the table like coins. Here, words are traded in whispers, pressed against shoulders, brushed into hair. You overhear fragments. A man promising to back another's campaign in exchange for favours when the East erupts again, another bargaining for relief from debts owed to tax collectors. A courtesan interrupts one such bargain by pressing a fig to the debtor's lips, and suddenly the talk dissolves into laughter. You can't tell whether she ended the deal or sealed it, maybe both. The scholarly debate returns, tugging at the edge of your thoughts. Are accounts of these hidden rooms exaggerations, inventions of moralists and satirists who wanted to portray Rome's elite as hypocrites? Some historians argue the orgiastic tales are literary flourishes, not reflections of nightly reality. Yet frescoes, inscriptions, and even the writings of disgusted senators suggest otherwise. It's possible the truth is not as wild as the myth, but it's certainly not as clean as the marble speeches carved for history. In these violet-lit rooms, it becomes easy to believe that memory and exaggeration are lovers, not rivals. A courtesan settles beside you, the cushion dipping as her shoulder brushes yours. She doesn't speak at first, only tilts her goblet toward yours, a silent toast. Her eyes, outlined in kohl, catch the green light and hold it. "You look uncomfortable," she finally says, not unkindly. You laugh softly, admitting that the whole evening feels like stepping into a myth you're not sure you want to be part of. She smiles knowingly. That's the trick. The myth swallows you whether you want it or not. Better to taste it than to choke. She plucks a grape from a dish and presses it between your lips, her fingers grazing your chin before withdrawing. The sweetness bursts, and you realize she's right. You are already inside the story. Not far away, a senator has begun a game with dice, predicting fortunes based on throws, as though the gods were drunk gamblers leaning over his shoulder. The courtesans laugh, egging him on, and he brags that his winning streak means Jupiter favours his upcoming motion in the Senate. The others groan, but you can't help thinking, in Rome, superstition is as sharp a tool as rhetoric. If a senator can convince his peers that the gods are with him, even through dice, he's already won half the battle. The room thickens with warmth and laughter, but under it all you sense a constant undercurrent of negotiation. These hidden chambers are not escapes from politics, they're politics stripped of togas, soaked in wine, blurred by perfume. What's decided here may never be spoken of in daylight, yet tomorrow, when the Senate gathers, alliances will already have shifted. Rome, you realise, isn't governed by marble columns or decrees carved in bronze. It's governed here, in shadowed rooms, where senators lean too close to courtesans and whisper secrets sweetened with figs. Your courtesan leans in again, her anklet bells brushing your calf, and asks you a question you can't quite hear over the laughter. You nod anyway, because here nodding is often safer than answering. She smiles, refills your goblet, and the night slides a little deeper into its own myth. The muffled rhythm from the main hall fades further as the hidden chamber deepens into its own pulse. Torches hiss in their brackets. Green glass light trembling across painted walls where gods chase mortals into embraces that look half tender, half violent. The courtesan beside you traces idle circles on the rim of her goblet, and the senators in nearby couches have leaned so close their foreheads nearly touch. Voices sink, not into silence, but into that dangerous register where politics and lust share the same whisper. You realise this is what the feast was building toward: debates in the dark, half fuelled by wine, half fuelled by desires Rome never admits in daylight. Across from you, Hawknose has positioned himself beside the provincial governor, the one who flinched earlier when shortages were mentioned. The flute from the main chamber threads faintly through the curtain, a lullaby under their conversation. "Africa owes Rome," Hawknose murmurs, his tone coated in velvet. The governor sips, stalls, then mutters something about ships delayed by storms. Hawknose leans closer, his lips brushing the rim of his neighbour's goblet as if tasting the excuse itself. You can see the courtesan sitting between them glance back and forth, eyes like a pendulum measuring the weight of words. She doesn't speak, but her presence keeps both men smiling wider than their promises deserve. A senator you've nicknamed Silver Fox rolls dice against the curve of his cup, letting them tumble until they show a double 6. He chuckles, declares that Fortuna clearly favours his argument, and launches into a claim about military funding in the east. If Parthia wavers, he says, we should be ready to bite. His neighbour, Marble Smile, counters smoothly that Parthia is more profitable alive than bleeding. The courtesan at their couch tips her cup, spilling a trickle of wine deliberately onto Silver Fox's wrist. He laughs, wipes it away, but in that pause, Marble Smile's argument carries a little further. It dawns on you that courtesans aren't distractions here. They're conductors, shifting tempo, breaking rhythm, amplifying whichever melody pleases them most. Historical fact to anchor you: Rome's Senate often functioned less like a parliament and more like an elite club, where formal debates in daylight were rehearsals for the real negotiations held in private. Patronage, bribery, blackmail, all lubricated deals that shaped the empire. Cicero himself admitted that decisions weren't always made in marble chambers, but in villas, gardens, or over dinner tables. Tonight is simply a more extravagant version of that truth, draped in silk and perfumed smoke. And yet, there's a quirkier layer to this darkness. Some senators treat it like theatre. Laurel Wreath, for instance, insists on quoting poetry at every turn. When another man proposes raising taxes on imported silks, Laurel Wreath replies not with numbers, but with a line from Ovid about garments more transparent than water. The courtesans giggle, the senators laugh, and somehow the policy question dissolves into a toast. You marvel at how effortlessly poetry can smother economics when the wine flows freely. Still, underneath the laughter there's a constant tension. You can feel it in the way Hawknose grips his goblet too tightly, in the way Silver Fox's eyes dart toward the curtain every few breaths, as though expecting someone to appear. The debates here are masked, yes, but they're also razor-sharp. Who funds which legion, who controls which grain shipments, who owes debts too heavy to survive. These aren't just words in the dark. They're blades pressed lightly against throats, waiting for dawn to decide who bleeds. The scholarly debate seeps into your thoughts again. Were such whispered negotiations common practice, or are we layering modern cynicism onto Roman banquets? Some argue that the Senate's public sessions held more real weight than we give them credit for, and that stories of conspiracies hatched in the dark are later exaggerations. Others counter that the sheer scale of corruption, bribes, patronage networks, senators caught in scandals, proves that these secret dealings weren't exceptions but the rule. You sip your wine and wonder, if the truth sits between, does it even matter? Either way, the empire is being carved up before your eyes in a chamber that smells of roses and blood. A courtesan leans across you, her hair brushing your cheek, to refill your cup. Her voice is low, conspiratorial. Careful what you overhear. Some secrets are heavier than others. Her smile softens the warning, but you feel the weight settle anyway. Around you the conversations blur together. Grain in Africa, troops in the east, a temple dedication in exchange for debt relief. Each senator speaks softly, but together the murmurs create a storm cloud of deals too thick to pierce. Quirky fact for your collection. Romans sometimes believed darkened rooms were closer to truth, that shadows peeled away pretenses daylight enforced. Philosophers like Seneca praised simplicity, but even he admitted that darkness makes confessions easier. Tonight, that belief is alive in the chamber. Senators confess not sins but strategies, whispering futures into existence. The courtesans tilt their heads, listen to poll without appearing to, storing every word like pearls. Your own cup empties again, and the courtesan beside you refills it with practiced ease. "What do you want from this night?" she asks again, echoing the dice question from earlier. But her eyes aren't playful this time. They're sharp, assessing. You hesitate because in this room even silence is an answer. Finally you murmur, "To leave awake." She laughs softly, though you suspect she knows you mean more than not passing out drunk. The music from the main hall swells faintly, a reminder that this chamber isn't the end of the feast, only another layer. The debates here haven't resolved. They never do. They're planted like seeds, left to grow in the Senate's marble tomorrow. But for tonight, the seeds are watered with wine, perfumed with incense, and tucked into the folds of whispered indulgence. You lean back against the cushions, goblet in hand, and let the darkness carry you deeper. You become aware of the air before you notice anything else, how it turns from a heavy stew into something layered and deliberate. A perfume with a plan. In the main hall it was incense and roast and sweat thrown together like gladiators. In here, it's choreography. A slave arrives with a bronze thymia Tyrian, an incense burner on a long stem, and swings it gently so that curls of fragrant smoke ribbon across the couches. Another kneels by a shallow brazier, feeding it little brown pastilles between tongs, each pellet snapping with a soft spark and blooming into resin-sweet breath. Frankincense, then myrrh, then something sharper, maybe cassia, maybe storax, until the odours stack up like harmonies. You lift your head and inhale. The lamb from the earlier rite is a memory now. The wine sugar has been half tamed, and the human heat that clung to your skin is dressed in fitter clothing. The room has been fumigated into confidence. Your courtesan notices you noticing. "If the city stinks," she says, "the villa must not." She gestures with her chin at the servants making their slow rounds, like gardeners pruning scent instead of roses. You follow her gaze. One sprinkles saffron-infused water on the carpeted rushes. Another pinches a pinch of powdered iris to toss onto the brazier. A puff of cool, rooty sweetness that politely elbows aside the fishy ghost of garum still haunting the edge of your tongue. Even the torches have been dressed, their wicks trimmed to cut the sooty breath, their oil mixed with a whisper of resin, so the smoke itself smells like an expensive opinion. Rome cannot make the Tiber stop smelling like a river that works for a living, but Rome can make this room lie about it. Historical fact, pinned like a sprig behind your ear. Romans worshipped through scent as much as through sight or sound. Frankincense, olibanum, and myrrh moved across the world like gold, funneled from Arabia and the Horn of Africa into markets where senators' stewards haggled with the same stubbornness they used in the Forum. Incense rose from altars, from household shrines, from funeral pyres, from dinner tables masquerading as temples. Perfumed oils, unguentum, were an industry. Nardinum, spikenard, thick and heady. Susanum, lily, light and floral. Myrtium, myrtle, green and clean. And the famous megallium, a recipe credited to a perfumer named Megallus, that blended myrrh, cassia and resin into something sticky rich. Unguent jars, unguentaria, glittered in glass and alabaster, little missiles aimed at memory. People didn't just want to be seen, they wanted to be smelled. You catch hints of that arsenal now. Someone has slathered lily oil on their wrists, someone else's hair has been dressed with saffron, just enough that every toss dusts the air with sun. A courtesan crosses the room trailing cinnamon, and a senator she passes unconsciously inhales like he's catching courage. The cushions themselves breathe out something like cedar and wax. The walls' frescoes, warmed by torches, give off the faint pigment tang that makes ancient rooms feel alive. It's sensory politics. No matter what happened at the shrine, if this chamber smells like gods and gardens, then everyone inside can pretend they are more than human for another hour. Quirky, and a little dark bonus from the rumour cabinet. Later gossip about emperors insists that one, Elagabalus, once buried his dinner guests in a blizzard of rose petals released from a false ceiling. Perfumer's prank, fragrance weaponized into danger. Was it true? The source is messy, even gleefully unreliable, but the story persists because it makes a crooked kind of sense. Rome loves scent and spectacle so much that the line between pampering and peril could blur into the same colour as these violet lights. You glance up at the coffered ceiling and picture panels sliding, petals hissing down like pink snow, and you can almost hear the courtesans' bells under the muffled coughs. You and the courtesan shift so that your shoulders touch. She smudges a dab of oil from a tiny alabaster vial onto the inside of your wrist. "Spikenard," she says, "from a friend with good ships." You lift your arm and breathe in the warm hay-sweet note, and for a moment the room tilts toward a mountain night you've never had. That's another Roman trick. Sent as travel, as time machine, as evidence of empire. If your skin can smell like faraway hills, perhaps your name can stretch that far too. The courtesan watches your face the way a perfumer watches a customer's pupils. "Better," she says, satisfied, and settles back with a cat's economy. Not all the smells can be charmed into submission. Under the incense there's still the iron whisper from the sacrifice, a penny taste clinging to the back of the throat. Someone nearby has worked up a nervous sweat with all this whispering about grain and troop pay. His body admits what his mouth never will. The perfume doesn't erase these truths, it negotiates with them, throws silk over bone. You tilt your goblet and take a small slip of wine, spiced and mellow, and the peppery edge helps the whole orchestra stay in tune. Scholarly debate floats in with the smoke and refuses to leave. How saturated was Roman life with perfume, really? Were these clouds of scent everyday experiences for the elite, or special occasion thunderheads summoned for performances like this? Some scholars argue the literary sources exaggerate that satirists and moralists smell decency and reported decadence. Others point to residue on glass vials, to price lists, to complaints about men who reeked of cinnamon at dawn, and say, no, the elite swam in it. There's even back and forth over those Egyptian perfume cones seen in art. Waxy caps melting fragrance down hair and skin. Did they actually exist? Or are they symbolic shorthand painted by artists? If they did Rome ever try the fad? You look around and think, if someone sold a melting cone that promised to drown out garum and goat, this room would have bought two. A slave brushes past you with a basket of fresh bay leaves and a bowl of stoky coals. He tosses a handful onto the embers. The leaves crackle, and a bright green scent bursts across the chamber, clearing the palate, the way sorbet clears a tongue. Across the room, Silver Fox pauses mid-argument, sniffs, and smirks as though the air has agreed with him. Hawknose barely notices. He's deep in a murmur that smells like debt. Marble Smile lifts his cup and closes his eyes in theatrical appreciation. Because of course he does. The courtesans, who understand how smell and mood braid, time their laughs to the bay smoke crest. For a few breaths, the room is a laurel grove where nothing painful ever happens. You remember the incense at the shrine, the steady tibia drowning chance noises, the haruspex tasting omen in viscera, and you feel the echo here. Even without gods formally invited, scent bends fate. A courtesan distracts a question with a puff of lily from her wrist. A slave erases a tense silence with a drop of resin. A senator buys himself a heartbeat's grace with a napkin dabbed in myrtle. Rome legislates with tablets and speeches, but it also legislates with air. Your courtesan tilts her head, studying you. "You're breathing easier," she says. "Good. Don't mistake it for safety." Light sarcasm, bedtime truth. You nod, appreciating the mercy and the warning in one. The ivy on your temples has warmed and is letting go of a faint peppery green. Your skin now carries spikenard's soft shadow. Your couch breathes cedar. Your cup offers date honey and heat. You are a scented argument in a room full of them. A servant appears at the curtain, wafting a fan cut from peacock feathers, blue-green eyes winking like a row of little quiet judges. He stirs the air rather than the guests, coaxing the incense plume from corner to corner. The mosaic dolphins on the floor seem to surf the smoke. The frescoed swan above leader appears to move. You watch the current find laurel wreath and notice him exhale with something like gratitude. He brings the back of his hand to his nose, a gesture as old as childhood. Even piety is allowed a sigh when the room smells like absolution. One last fringe tidbit slides in under the door. Theatres in Rome sometimes sprayed saffron water from hidden pipes during performances, spazio, to sweeten the crowd and, conveniently, sell the show as more than noise and wood. Nero was accused, with the relish of enemies, of drenching his palaces in such extravagances. Suetonius paints dinners with rotating ceilings and perfumed rain. Exaggeration? Almost certainly. Aspiration? Also certainly. Tonight the host doesn't have a machine, but he has a staff that can make the air itself feel expensive. The effect lands either way. You sit with it, letting the layers settle. Under incense, wine. Under wine, meat. Under meat, human. under human ambition. The scent scheme, like every other scheme tonight, doesn't delete truth so much as dress it, powder its cheeks, put a wreath in its hair and send it back out to smile. You've learned the code by now, watch the air as much as the eyes. When the frankincense rises, a plea is coming. When the bay flares, a point will be made. When the lily laughs, someone will change the subject. The courtesan taps your wrist, eyes bright. Come, she says, before the myrrh turns to smoke and memories. The slave with clever eyes is back at the curtain, and the violet light on the other side has deepened like dusk sliding toward night. You rise, breathing the last of the laurel and lily, and step after her through the shifting perfume. The air closes behind you like a smile that knows tomorrow you'll smell of this room and wonder which part of the night chose to follow you home. The violet light deepens into plum as you and your guide slip into the farther room, where the ceiling lifts and the air cools down a whole mood. Somewhere above, an oculus pours in a button of moonlight that lands on a small bronze of a boyish god with a lazy smile, a cluster of grapes in one hand and a leopard curled at his ankle. Ivy climbs the walls as if it has been told this is a story about itself. The flute from the main hall is gone. In its place, a sapid drum murmurs a heartbeat, and little bronze cymbals answer with a hush of bright metal. You know the name without being told: Liber, Dionysus, Bacchus if you're being friendly, which, tonight, everyone is. The host has changed too, not his clothes still dazzling, but his temperature. He stands at the room's centre with a thyrsus in hand, a staff sheathed in ivy with a pine cone for a crown, and looks like a man delivering a joke with cosmic timing. Guests, he purrs, a courtesy to an old friend. Slaves move like tidewater through ankles and curtains, setting shallow bowls at the corners, pouring a dark, sweet wine into each. Your ivy wreath is straightened by gentle fingers. A courtesan presses into your palm a sprig of vine as if it were a password. You're half tempted to whisper it at the bronze boy and see if he laughs. The music slides into a different key. Phrygian, someone mutters, and even if you can't name the scale, you feel the diagonal pull of it, the way it invites you to lean, sway, tilt. Courtesans gather thirsty, their anklets keeping time, and a pair of masked performers appear where you swear there was only blank wall. One with the bearded muzzle of Silenus, plump and pleased, the other with goatish curls and a grin that could sharpen itself if needed. The masks are theatre, you tell yourself, but the hair prickles on your forearms anyway. There's a reason these faces were carved onto doorways to keep out the jealous eye. Gods and ghosts love a good party. Historical fact to anchor your breath. Rome once tried to throttle this god. In 186 BCE, the Senate issued the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, a decree that restricted Bacchic rites. No nighttime gatherings, no crowds, no priest without permission. After rumours of conspiracies, fraud, and ecstatic chaos spooked the city. The Latin text survives on a bronze tablet found in southern Italy. Very official, very stern, and eliminate the cult, but register the faithful. Keep the frenzy on a leash. It didn't kill the worship, it domesticated it. Centuries later, the imagery still blooms on cups and walls, and nights like this borrow its pageantry while pretending they're only telling jokes. The host tips a rhyton, an animal-headed drinking horn, over the nearest bowl and lets wine patter into the surface like rain on a pond. He lifts the horn as though it were a microphone. Evo horn, he says softly, the old cry shaped for small rooms. The first answer is scattered, Evo here, Evo there, like sparrows that haven't decided whether to flock. Then the drum nudges, the cymbals breathe, and the voices gather into one thread. The word is both nonsense and key. You feel yourself join it before you decide to, a syllable humming in your throat and loosening something that had been clenched since the threshold under Priapus. Quirky superstition drifts in with a sparkle. Amethyst, the ancients swore, keeps a head sober under heavy wine. Some Romans wore amethyst rings engraved with Bacchus himself hedging bets. Invite the gods, dodge the hangover. Between the ivy on your brow and the stone on someone else's finger, the room looks like a wellness influencer's dream kit, minus the disclaimer. Your courtesan taps your wreath with the pine of her thyrsus, and laughs in your ear. Double protection. Triple. If you behave. As if that's why anyone came. The dances begin, not the flirtatious ribbons you saw earlier, but something looser and older, like grapevines learning the shape of a trellis. Bare feet slide on mosaic dolphins. Thyrsi writes sleepy spirals in the air. Silenus shuffles with comic dignity. The goatish mask nips playfully at a senator's shoulder. The man pretends to swat and misses by a mile, then grins like a boy caught stealing figs. The drum keeps its patient pulse. The cymbals murmur like distant surf. The bronze god watches from his puddle of moon. Whether anyone believes in presence is suddenly the wrong question. In this lighting, with this playlist, belief becomes a sliding scale. A breeze fingers your hair, though no window is open. The flames flatten and then recover. A courtesan's laugh catches in her throat and turns into something softer, almost a sigh. Hawknose, who negotiates like a grindstone by day, closes his eyes and sways exactly once, a private concession to forces he would deny in Latin. Laurel Wreath's lips move. Maybe a hymn, maybe an apology. The host raises his retin toward the bronze boy and smiles with that same cat-at-the-cage expression. "Walk among us," he says lightly, the way you call a tame dog who remembers when it was a wolf. The scholarly debate slips up like a neighbour bearing olives. Is this religion or theatre, faith or fashion? Some historians insist elite Romans wore Bacchus as costume jewellery, all grape leaves and no transcendence. Others argue that mystery cults, from Dionysus to Isis to Mithras, offered real experience, the sense of stepping out of the Senate's clockwork into a night without edges. Tonight gives both arguments teeth. You watch a senator tuck a coin under the bowl as a votive, and then immediately test a joke about accounting. Sincere mockery, mocking sincerity. The empire runs fine on mixed fuel. Silenus begins a riddle. The old man's game, voice muffled by the beard of his mask. It's about a cup that empties itself when filled too full. The courtesans groan, then clap when Marble Smile answers with a pun that could get him exiled if the god had less humour. Someone tosses a wreath. Silenus catches it with a flourish and crowns the bronze boy. The laugh is real, but the hush that follows it is realer. The drum slows. The cymbals turn into a single breath. For a beat that stretches like warm wax, you feel watched, not by senators or slaves or courtesans, but by the idea of a god whose job is to blur edges until you fall into truth by accident. Fringe speculation, presented with a raised eyebrow and a disclaimer. Some modern scholars wonder whether the spice wines of the elite ever carried a whisper of stronger plants, poppy or mandrake, the same botanicals physicians use it for pain and sleep. We have recipes for conditum with honey and pepper, for resinous brews not shy about heat. We have medical notes about mandrake steeped in wine before surgery. Did those streams ever mingle at parties like this, producing euphoria the host could pretend was piety? Maybe, maybe not. Your cup tastes of pepper and dates and a resin edge, and whatever else is in it, the mixture works on your edges with tender teeth. The god, or the idea of the god, makes his circuit. Not a vision, you're not that far gone, but the small convincing coincidences that keep belief on a leash. The drum's echo lines up exactly with your heartbeat. The breeze finds you again and cools the wine sweat at your temple. The bronze leopard's shadow stretches to cover a senator who's been angling too hard all night, and he finally shuts up. In a corner, a courtesan sets her thyrsus upright and it balances longer than it should before falling. She bows to the laughter as if she planned the physics. Maybe she did. Maybe something else liked the trick as much as you did. A hush circles the bowls as the host pours another quiet libation. For those who came, he says, eyes skipping over the room like stones, and those who pretended they didn't. Laurel Wreath answers with a scrap of hymn, and even Hawknose hums a piece of it too low to count. Your courtesan's fingers find your wrist, checking the spikenard she dabbed earlier, as if reassurance could be smelled. The ivy on your brow has warmed to your skin. The wreath's shadow lays a soft green crescent on the wall beside your head. For a moment, you understand why someone might build a life around this god, because he offers permission to loosen, and also the excuse to say you were led astray by divinity rather than desire. Useful, that. Rome is nothing if not practical about its mysteries. Then, as neatly as curtain cords pulled by competent hands, the energy softens. The drum becomes a memory. The cymbals turn into quiet coins in quiet palms. Silenus doffs his mask with a little bow. Goatgrin does the same and proves to be a boy with a dimple and an expression that says he knows exactly how silly and necessary he just was. The bronze boy's moonlit puddle thins as a cloud crosses somewhere far above. The host plants his thyrsus by the statue, a gentleman parking a cane, and offers a smile that returns the room to itself. We are blessed, he says, and the line gets the laugh it deserves. Wine resumes its regular business. Dice produce their predictable deceptions. Promises get lacquered one more coat. But the violet room keeps a residue, the way frankincense clings to hair. You catch a slave in the doorway, the clever-eyed one, watching the bowls with the careful neutrality of someone who knows which way belief flows and how to keep out of its current. His glance flicks over the courtesans, the masks, the bronze, the ivy, and then away, counting something you can't seize. You suspect that whatever the god did or didn't do, the servants will tidy it into memory by morning. That is another kind of miracle. The world put back in order so politely that chaos feels like a generous guest. You stand, legs a touch liquid, and feel the wreath shift. The courtesan corrects it with 2 fingers and a smile you'll remember tomorrow more kindly than you should. Beyond the curtain, the triclinium hums like a hive again, and the scent from the burners follows you. Myrrh and laurel, and something like laughter. Whether a god walked among you, or only the rumour of one, the night has pocketed the effect. You step toward the doorway, and the clever-eyed slave steps back first, leaving a path as clean as a libation line. The curtain drops behind you, and the din of the triclinium swells again, pulling you back into the feast's main artery. The shift feels abrupt, like surfacing from underwater. Torchlight wobbles, laughter spikes, and the smell of roasted meat rushes back in, trying to smother the myrrh still clinging to your hair. You sink onto a couch, goblet refilled, before your fingers even ask, and realise you've begun to watch everything with new eyes. Not the senators, not the courtesans, the slayers, the ones who glide in and out of the scene like breath. Silent, quick, indispensable, and very much alive in this theatre of excess. You start noticing their choreography. One kneels by the host's elbow, refilling his goblet before it reaches the bottom quarter. Never too early, never too late. Another clears empty plates with the speed of sleight of hand, whisking away peacock bones before they can be noticed as anything but novelty. A boy no older than 15 drifts through the chamber with a tray of figs and honey, and you watch him keep his eyes lowered even as senators paw at the fruit, their rings flashing dangerously close to his fingers. His restraint is as polished as the silver he carries. Historical fact: Rome's elite feasts depended on armies of slaves, dozens, sometimes hundreds. Writers like Seneca and Juvenal sneered at nobles who needed a slave for every task, one to cut bread, another to carve meat, one to hold a lamp, another to fan away the smoke, and luxury wasn't just food or wine, it was having human bodies dedicated to your convenience. Pliny tells us of slaves trained only to remember guest names, functioning as living address books. Tonight you see the truth in that. Slaves orbit senators like moons, each with a single job, each expected to know it by heart. But there's another truth you can't ignore. Slaves also watch, they hear, they remember. The courtesans may collect secrets in whispers, but the slaves collect them in silence. The boy who refills Hawknose's cup has surely heard the half-muttered threats about grain shortages. The woman who trims the wicks of the torches has certainly caught the laughter masking some conspiracy. Rome trusts that slaves won't matter, that their knowledge will evaporate into servitude. But you can feel the lie hanging in the air. Empires rest on backs like these, and backs remember. A quirky, unsettling fact. Some Roman households trained slaves as ear-bearers, their only role to stand behind their master in public, listening, memorizing, storing gossip like jars of wine. These slaves were repositories of knowledge and danger, punished harshly if they spoke out of turn, but quietly feared for how much they knew. You glance around the hall and realize you're surrounded by human archives, every one of them watching without watching, a collective memory that could undo Rome if it ever decided to. The courtesan beside you leans in. "Don't stare too much," she murmurs, following your gaze toward the servants. They notice. Her anklet jingles as she shifts, covering your line of sight with her own body, but she smiles faintly as though she respects your curiosity. The masters think we are the only ones who collect their secrets. They forget who scrubs the vomit from the floor when they've said too much. She sips her wine, eyes glittering, and you realize she's telling you something important. Power isn't only in togas. The scholarly debate hums in here as well. Some historians argue that slaves at Roman banquets were invisible, mere furniture with no agency. Others argue the opposite, that their silence gave them leverage, that the empire's politics were shaped by this quiet class as much as by senators themselves. Court records survive where slaves' testimonies extracted under torture decided fates of powerful men. Their voices submitted until the moment their owners needed them silenced most. Tonight you can almost feel that contradiction breathing in the room, a silence so loud it could split marble. Near the host's couch, a girl no older than 12 plays with a spray of ivy fallen from someone's wreath, twining it around her fingers. She looks bored, as if sacred plants and drunken senators are nothing new to her. A senator claps his hands sharply and she straightens, snapping back into her role like a puppet pulled by its string. The sound unsettles you. For all the grandeur, this room is also a cage, gilded for some, locked for others. Your courtesan sets a fig between your lips and wipes the sweetness with her thumb. They will all pretend not to see tomorrow, she whispers, eyes sliding toward the slaves again. But the ones who serve remember everything. You nod, tasting honey and iron, and realise you've begun to think of the slaves not as background, but as the truest audience. The senators perform indulgence, the courtesans perform desire, but the slaves? They watch without mask, without drink, without ivy. They will carry this night, entire, into the morning. Quirky example. One Roman senator supposedly executed a slave for serving him lukewarm wine, sparking outrage. Another demanded his slaves memorize entire plays so they could recite them during meals. Excess breeds absurdity, but it also breeds tension. You imagine the quiet resentment simmering in these walls, in the hands that pour Falernian, in the eyes that never quite rise to meet yours. Rome runs on fear, but also on the gamble that memory will stay obedient. Tonight, you're not so sure. The room stirs again, laughter rising as dice rattle in bowls and new platters arrive. Slaves move swiftly, refilling, replenishing, reshaping the illusion of endless abundance. You recline, ivy wreath slipping further, and sip your wine. But you're watching the slaves now, the tilt of their heads, the flick of their glances, the way their bodies tell truth the senators ignore. And you know, without needing to hear it, that these silent attendants aren't just part of the feast, they are its spine. The servers return in formation, balancing silver platters, so wide they could serve as mirrors if the torchlight weren't so heavy on them. The hum of the triclinium swells as guests lean forward, hungry not for food but for the next proof of extravagance. And then the lids lift and the smell of roasted spice and honey surges through the chamber. What was hinted at in appetizers now becomes spectacle at full volume, courses designed to announce status as loudly as a triumphal procession. The first tray is carried to the host himself, flamingo tongues arranged like petals on a dish, pink and glossy under a drizzle of garum spiked with pepper. You can't help but stare. The Romans, who conquered the known world, reduced one of its most striking birds to garnish. The host plucks one tongue with delicate fingers, chews and grins, wide enough to show the gold edge of a tooth. Around him, laughter ripples, but it's the nervous kind. No one wants to look provincial by recoiling. Dormice follow, more plentiful than in the first round. These aren't simple stuffed morsels, but sculpted, glazed with honey until they gleam like caramelized jewels. Slaves set them down in bowls lined with leaves, the tiny curled bodies dusted with poppy seeds. You imagine the farmers somewhere on the edges of Italy fattening these creatures in clay jars, their whole lives reduced to a senator's afterthought. The courtesan beside you plucks one delicately, nibbles, and lets the sweetness melt on her lips with calculated slowness. Around the couches, senators' eyes track her mouth rather than the dish. Then comes the parade of birds, partridges roasted whole, pheasants dyed with saffron until their skin glows golden, a swan and its long neck coiled around itself, refeathered with its own plumage so that it appears alive until the knife plunges in, and, crowning the act, a peacock. The bird is reassembled after roasting, its head propped upright, tail spread into an iridescent fan. The meat steams under the plumage, shimmering with a glaze of date syrup and pepper. Senators clap as though a general has entered the room. The dish is carried slowly, like a relic, and placed at the centre where all can admire. Historical fact, ancient writers, from Martial to Apicius, record these very dishes. Flamingo tongues were said to be tender and faintly fishy, prized mostly for rarity. Dormice were a staple delicacy, mentioned in sumptuary laws, trying and failing to curb their popularity. Apicius, Rome's celebrity gourmand, catalogued recipes for peacock, ostrich, even crane. His collection, preserved in fragments, is less cookbook than manifesto. Nothing is too rare, too odd, too extravagant if it can show Rome's reach. The table was empire in miniature, conquered lands turned into flavour. A senator with silver beard lifts a slice of peacock breast, its meat pale and steaming. He chews theatrically, closes his eyes, and declares it worth a year's tribute. His neighbour laughs, pretending to agree, but you notice him nudge his courtesan instead, letting her take the first bite. Whether he distrusts the dish, or simply the cook, you can't tell. The courtesan swallows with poise, then smirks at him as if to say, "See, still breathing." Quirky fact, Romans adored elaborate food theatre. Hosts would serve pigs stuffed with live thrushes so that when the belly was slit, birds would explode into flight. Others baked pastries shaped like wild boar, then revealed real boar meat inside. One satirist even described dishes that looked like everyday fare. Lentils, beans, but were actually minced fish dyed and sculpted to mimic humble meals, a parody of simplicity. Tonight the host has chosen spectacle rather than parody mode, and you can feel his pride radiating as slaves slice the peacock with precise hands, distributing morsels onto silver plates. The scholarly debate hovers here too. Were such feasts nightly reality or moral exaggerations? Some argue that stories of flamingo tongues and peacocks are outliers, spun into legend by satirists mocking the wealthy. Others counter that archaeological digs uncover bones of exotic animals in Roman trash heaps, peacocks, rabbits, even imported fish, suggesting that extravagance really did reach absurd heights. Perhaps the truth is in between. Not every dinner was this decadent, but enough were to make them infamous. Tonight, sitting with a plate of gilded bird before you, you lean toward believing the scandal. The courtesan beside you feeds you a slice of pheasant with her fingers, her touch lingering at your lips. The meat is rich, gamey, the saffron glaze cloying. You chew slowly, aware that this isn't about flavour. It's about performance. To eat these foods is to declare yourself part of the circle, willing to play the game of excess. To refuse would be to reject the host's power. The courtesan smiles at your compliance, then wipes a drop of glaze from your chin with her thumb and licks it away, earning a cheer from nearby couches. Slaves circulate with wine to wash down the richness, and you notice one man struggle to finish his portion of peacock. He coughs into his napkin, muttering that the bird is tough. His neighbour sneers, calling him uncultured, and the table erupts in laughter. You realise the food itself is a test, not of taste but of loyalty and wit. To praise the dish is to flatter the host. To criticise it is to risk insult. The truth that the meat is chewy, the sauce is overwhelming doesn't matter. The performance does. As platters empty, the room grows louder. Senators slap backs, courtesans toast with jewelled goblets, laughter ricochets off frescoed walls. Yet under it all you sense a current of unease. This isn't nourishment. It's theatre bordering on grotesque. You picture the peasants in the countryside eating barley bread and onions, while here the Senate devours flamingo tongues. You wonder if some of the laughter masks guilt, or if guilt itself has been eaten long ago. Your courtesan leans close, whispering through the noise. "Do you taste power?" she asks, eyes glittering. You swallow the last bite of pheasant, thick on your tongue, and realise that yes, you do. Not because it's delicious, but because it's absurd. And in Rome, absurdity is the most expensive flavour of all. You've just finished pretending the peacock was delicious when the atmosphere tilts again, not with drums or incense this time, but with a hush that moves like a ripple across silk. Heads turn toward the doorway as if tugged by the same thread. Through the curtain steps a woman in saffron silk and a posture that could balance law codes. Not a courtesan, a matron, hair arranged in the severe nodus style, pearls like quiet lightning. Two younger women drift at her flanks, veils lifter, eyes steady. The host rises 3 fingers worth, exactly as far as courtesy demands for someone who can change tomorrow's vote from a couch. "Domina," he says, and the word lands with a soft thud of recognition. So it's one of those nights, not men alone with their hired muses, but wives, sisters, highborn friends stepping into the theatre to watch, to steer, to scandalise by existing in the right room at the wrong hour. The courtesans feel the shift before anyone else. Anklets hush, smiles sharpen. They pull their silks a little closer to the skin, not retreat exactly, more like resetting pieces on a board. Your ankleted guide squeezes your wrist, a message in code. Stay supple. The rules just multiplied. The domina surveys the room with the cool confidence of someone who has never had to raise her voice to be heard. Along the wall, the senator's red shoes sit in their obedient row, and she passes them with the hint of a smile, barefoot men deciding the fate of provinces. She chooses a couch near the host, a position that would be humble if her gaze weren't so imperial, and perches on its edge instead of reclining. One of her companions, bolder, or simply tired of posture, slides down to a half recline, elbow to cushion, veil slipped to the shoulder. Someone's breath catches. Rome still owns a dictionary of scandal, and respectable woman reclines is printed in large dramatic capitals. Historical fact to pin this moment: the place of women at Roman dinners changed over time and rank. In the stern cliché of the Republic, matroni kept to their own spheres, and respectable wives sat upright if they attended at all. Reclining was coded male, a privilege tied to citizen status and public life. By the late Republic and into the Empire, elite women appeared more often at banquets, sometimes seated, sometimes scandalously reclining, enough that Pompeian frescoes show mixed-sex dining, with women reclined beside men, and Roman writers never stopped arguing about it. Of course they didn't. Laurel Wreath moves first, ever the curator of virtue. He rises to greet the domina with a line of good, dull poetry about chaste stars and civic harmony. She accepts the verse as if it were a flower and sets it down where it can do no harm. Marble Smile bows with a theatrical flourish, kissing the air over her hand at the precise distance that says, "I'm charming, not dangerous." Hawknose calculates swifter than a money changer, scoots a cushion and offers her a vantage point where she can hear half the room and be heard by all of it. Politics never sleeps, it only changes shoes. Your courtesan leans to your ear. "That veil is saffron-dyed," she whispers. "Bride colour. Saffron. Wedding torches, bridal slippers, the scent of beginnings. It's also," she adds, with a ghost of a grin, "the perfume some women favour when they want to be remembered." The domina's veil is a message in cloth. Virtuous wife, yes, and also aromatic rumour, walking. The younger companion, the half-recliner, toys with a sprig of myrtle, another bride's plant. You wonder whether this is a coordinated mood board or simple habit. In Rome, symbolism is a second language everyone speaks fluently by accident. Quirky law slides up with a wink. In Rome's older stories, half law, half legend, wives were once policed for wine as if it were treason. You hear echoes that respectable women weren't to drink at all. Husbands supposedly kept the clavis venaria, the wine cellar key. A kiss from a male relative, osculum, could double as a breath check. One tale even has a husband executing his wife for sipping. Most scholars call the harsher bits myth or moral fable, but the residue stuck. Women's drinking was a topic, which makes the domina's goblet now, watered, yes, but unmistakably wine, its own small smug revolution. She raises it, samples, meets the room's gaze over the rim, and the old ghost of prohibition dissolves like honey in warm Falernian. The courtesans reweave themselves into this new tapestry. Some pivot to the domina's entourage with compliments on fabrics and hairpins. Others cling closer to their senators, signalling loyalty as if it were a jewel you can hold up to the light. The domina lets them orbit. She's not here to scold the decorations, she is here to inventory the foundations. When Silver Fox tries a joke about the peacock's toughness, she beats him to his punchline with a smile that steals the laugh and hands it back brighter. He concedes with a bow, point to the woman who knows the room's temperature better than the arbiter Bibendi. The whisper work never stops. The domina's hand rests lightly on the host's sleeve, and in that touch you can feel a ledger flipping pages, a temple dedication in exchange for a tax reprieve. A niece married to the right ally, a certain freedman put on ice. Her companion, the half-recliner with the myrtle, leans toward Marble Smile and murmurs something that turns his teeth into a fence for a second. The courtesan nearest him slides her gaze toward you, amused. Even charms appreciate a skilled colleague. Scholarly debate tiptoes in, as it always does when women arrive. How present really were respectable women at scenes like this? Satirists like juvenile paint imperial women, Messalina, Agrippina, as engines of lust and power, slithering through banquets like bad dreams. Historians from Tacitus to Suetonius throw shadows long enough to distort whole lives. Some modern scholars argue those portraits are propaganda, misogyny sharpened into marble, political hit jobs disguised as moral lessons. Others answer with coins, inscriptions, houses laid out for mixed dining, and the stubborn fact that imperial wives and mothers, Livia, Agrippina the Younger, wielded influence that would be strange if it never walked through a dining room. The truth has two voices, and both are loud tonight. A slave arrives with a platter of greens, rocket leaves bright as new jealousy, sprinkled with vinegar, and a reckless hand of pepper. Your courtesan taps the dish with her fingernail, eyes dancing. "Eruca," she says. "They say it fans the flame." Aphrodisiac salad. Whether the claim belongs to physicians or poets is unclear, but the senators treat it like a dare. The domina tries a leaf, unbothered by the rumour. The half-recliner eats 3 and laughs at the burn. The host beams. If food is language, spice is punctuation, and he's writing in italics. The domina asks a question that sounds like courtesy but smells like audit, and the grain? Hawknose answers smoothly, the way a man does when he's already reshaped his facts to fit a better bowl. She lets him finish, then tilts her head. Winter remembers promises. The line lands like a small, elegant hammer. You feel the room adjust around it, subtly, but the way a ship acknowledges a new wind. Laurel Wreath murmurs a hymn about provident goddesses. Marble Smile offers a toast to Ceres. The clever-eyed slave appears with more watered wine for those who need sobering without losing face. Everyone plays their part. Another quirky thread flickers. The domina's hairpin is shaped like a tiny key. Whether it's merely pretty or a sly nod to the Clavis Venaria myth, you can't say. But its glint keeps catching Hawknose's eye, and you can almost see him negotiating with the reflection. Old law, new custom, the way symbols can be emptied and refilled like cups. The voices gather into a new rhythm. Women's laughter braided through men's boasting, courtesans' bells chiming against pearl earrings. The room is no less hungry for scandal, but the scandal now has counters. When a senator's hand wanders, the domina's gaze finds it. When Marble Smile begins a joke with a lazy edge, the half-recliner tops it with a line funnier and safer, and the room chooses hers. It turns out decadence can be domesticated without being declawed. It only needs someone to whistle when the dogs run too far. You sip, breathe, watch. If earlier the courtesans blurred politics into pleasure, now these women sharpen the blur into focus. They aren't decorations, they're editors. They cut indulgence where it will cost votes. They italicize alliances that will matter at dawn. They bend tradition not by breaking it, but by reclining an inch farther than yesterday, and making everyone else behave as if their Sardinsa, that inch had always existed. Across the couches, a rumour stirs that the Emperor's niece has been seen dining in the open, reclining like a man. Is it true? Is it bait? The debate flares and fades like a torch licked by a draught. Your courtesan grins, whispering, "If it isn't true tonight, it will be true next summer." That's Rome's other talent. It manifests its gossip on schedule. The domina sets down her cup and rises. The room tilts toward her like flowers toward a window. She thanks the host with the kind of smile you can spend at the treasury. "It is late," she says, which is how powerful people express mercy. She draws her veil up again, not as apology, but as a curtain on a scene she directed without once raising her voice. The half-recliner follows, Myrtle tucked behind her ear, rebellious even in departure. The courtesans watch them go, then resume their places, their eyes a little brighter. The red shoes by the wall sit steady. When the curtains fall back into place, the triclinium exhales. Laughter returns, wider, safer. The host lifts a hand. One more course, one more performance. You adjust your wreath and realise the room smells a tiny bit more of saffron than it did an hour ago. Power has a perfume tonight, and it isn't just myrrh. The saffron haze left by the domina has barely thinned when the torches are lowered and the room begins to tilt in another direction entirely. You feel it first in the laughter. Less crisp now, less tied to jokes and more to the simple act of existing in heat and wine. Then the music shifts. The flute slides into scales that wander. The lyre strums chords that don't resolve. A drumbeat begins, slow and steady, as though syncing itself with the heart of every person in the chamber. And just like that, the masks come off. Not the painted kind, but the invisible ones that senators polish daily like armour. It happens gradually, almost tenderly. Laurel Wreath, who had quoted hymns earlier with stern dignity, is now reclining with his head in a courtesan's lap, her fingers weaving through his hair as he murmurs something you suspect is not a prayer. Silver Fox, once the sharp wit of the dice game, has removed his wreath entirely, tossing it to a slave who catches it with barely disguised amusement. Hawknose, who never allows his expression to waver in the forum, is laughing so hard his cheeks blotch red, wine spilling down his chin unchecked. Their public selves, the marble, the oratory, the performance of severity, melts under the torchlight, replaced by something more human, if not exactly noble. A quirky fact, Romanton sometimes wore literal masks at banquets, papier-mâché or linen caricatures of gods and mythic figures. Some scholars think these were just party tricks meant for drinking games and bawdy theatre. Others suspect they had ritual undertones, echoes of the older symposia, where identity was deliberately blurred. Tonight, no one bothers with props. The intoxication and incense have done the work. The masks are already gone, replaced by flushed faces and unguarded gestures. The courtesans sense the shift and respond like seasoned navigators. They no longer tease delicately. They drape themselves across senators' shoulders, feed them grapes with fingers sticky from honey, bite into figs and press the juice to lips not their own. What began as performance now feels closer to frenzy, yet a frenzy choreographed, managed by women who know exactly how far to push without tipping into chaos too early. Their laughter blends with the flute, their anklets chime with the drum. It's difficult to tell whether they're conducting the music or the other way around. Historical note, masks were central to Roman theatre, designed not only to display expressions but to amplify voices in open-air amphitheatres. Persona itself meant through sound. Tonight, though, voices need no amplification. Every word lands heavy, sticky, charged. A senator whispers an oath of loyalty as though it were a confession to the gods. Another brags about money siphoned from a province, his words received with cheers rather than condemnation. The irony gnaws at you. In shedding their masks, they may be showing their truest selves, but the truth is uglier than the marble masks ever suggested. The scholarly debate sneaks back in. Were Roman banquets truly scenes of unmasking, or are we projecting modern fantasies onto them? Satirists like Petronius and Juvenal describe nights of grotesque indulgence. Masks dropped, bodies entwined, voices slurred into scandal. Some historians argue these are exaggerations, moralizing fables meant to warn readers about decadence. Others point to archaeological finds, rooms decorated with Dionysian revels, graffiti boasting of sexual conquests, skeletons with stomach contents showing absurd last meals, as evidence that the stories had roots in reality. You sit here, watching senators shed their dignity like sandals, and wonder if exaggeration is just truth with the volume turned up. Your courtesan tugs the ivy wreath from your head and places it on her own, tilting it rakishly. "Better, yes?" she asks, her lips stained dark from wine. You nod, laughing despite yourself. She dips a finger into your goblet, paints a line of wine across your cheek, then licks it away with a grin that's equal parts mockery and invitation. The room cheers, a chorus eager for spectacle, and suddenly you're part of the performance too. The mask you wore, the cautious guest, the observer, slips with the rest. Around you the unmasking grows bolder. One senator removes his toga entirely, tossing it into a corner, revealing not the chiselled form of a marble statue, but a soft, aging body that draws only laughter and applause. Another trades wreaths with a courtesan, pretending to be her servant for a moment, bowing deeply to her command. The boundaries between host and guest, senator and courtesan, blur into a single swaying body of laughter, sweat and wine. And yet, there's danger under the revelry. You notice Hawknose lean in too close to the provincial governor again, this time his hand gripping the man's knee, as if testing loyalty through flesh. You hear Silver Fox whisper into Marble Smile's ear, words muffled by the courtesan draped between them. But the tension in their shoulders tells you it isn't poetry. The masks may be off, but the blades are still hidden. The laughter is louder now, but it may be covering sharper negotiations than ever. Quirky superstition makes its way into the chaos. A courtesan dares the senator to drink with his wreath dipped into the cup, saying it will bind him to Bacchus himself. He does, soaking the ivy until it drips down his tunic, and the room erupts in chants of Evoe. You can't tell if anyone believes it, but belief hardly matters. The actor itself becomes truth for the night. the kind that can't be disproved in the morning without looking foolish. You lean back into the cushions, warm from wine and touch, watching the senators around you shed their identities like layers of clothing. Some do it joyfully, others with a kind of grim desperation, as though hoping to lose themselves before the night ends. You realise that in this room masks aren't stripped away, they're traded. Senators put down dignity and pick up indulgence, courtesans put down performance and pick up power, slaves put down invisibility and pick up memory, and you, well, you put down caution and pick up complicity, whether you like it or not. The drumbeat slows, then quickens, matching the rising tide of the room. A courtesan pulls you into the rhythm, her anklets chiming, her body swaying against yours. The mask is gone, the night is barefaced, and what comes next, you realise, will test more than appetite. The drumbeat steadies, then cracks into a sharper rhythm. The host claps once, a crisp sound that makes every torch flutter, and suddenly the feast changes colour again. From the far end of the hall, double doors swing wide, and slaves parade in with the creatures that belong more to myths than to kitchens. First, a peacock struts alive, its tail fanned like a rainbow wheel, shimmering under torchlight as though the very mosaics had come to life. Behind it, two boys tug a leash straining against the shoulders of a leopard, its spots flashing as it growls low in its throat. The crowd gasps, then cheers, the sound part awe, part intoxicated bravado. This is no longer dinner. It's a menagerie in motion. A parrot on a slave's arm squawks Latin phrases, salve e voi, earning shrieks of laughter. A small monkey in a gilded harness scampers along a serving tray, snatching figs before they reach senators' mouths. Every beast is both guest and prop, a reminder that Rome's reach extends to feather, fur and fang. Historical fact to ground this madness. Exotic animals were luxury symbols in Rome. Wealthy nobles imported leopards, peacocks, even crocodiles from conquered lands. Julius Caesar once staged games with giraffes. Augustus paraded rhinoceroses. While beasts usually met their end in the arena, they also appeared at feasts, sometimes as dishes, sometimes as decorations, sometimes as live curiosities meant to dazzle and disturb. Peacocks especially became synonymous with wealth. Their bones have been found in elite Roman trash heaps, and Apicius left recipes for them, though whether anyone truly enjoyed the chewy meat is questionable. Tonight, the animals blur boundaries between entertainment and appetite. The living peacock struts perilously close to the roasted one, still displayed on a silver platter with its tail pinned back on. The irony isn't lost on the guests, who roar with laughter, comparing the proud living bird to its glazed, defeated double. A senator jokes that Rome conquers all, alive or roasted. A courtesan pets the live bird's neck, then plucks a feather and tucks it into her hair. The senators cheer, as if conquest can be distilled into a gesture that frivolous, quirky detail. Some Romans believed parrots could carry messages from the gods. When the bird on the slave's arm croaks, Ave, Caesar. Half the room takes it as a sign of fortune. Marble Smile even lifts his goblet and toasts the creature, declaring that Rome should send parrots instead of ambassadors. The courtesan beside you mutters, cheaper too, and smothers a laugh in her goblet. The joke is sharper than she lets on. The leopard is less amusing. Its handler pulls taut on the leash, but the animal's muscles ripple with the same energy as a storm cloud. The senators cheer louder at its growl, as though daring danger itself to entertain them. One man flings a bone toward it, and the leopard snaps, teeth flashing in the firelight. The courtesans shriek theatrically, but their eyes betray real fear. You sense that the line between spectacle and disaster has never been thinner. The scholarly debate sneaks in again. Were exotic animals brought into banquets like this common, or are the stories inflated by satirists and historians eager to paint Roman elites as monstrous? Some scholars argue that beasts were usually reserved for arenas, not dining rooms. Others point to surviving frescoes of banquets with birds and animals painted into the background, along with written accounts describing pets and curiosities mingling with guests. Perhaps not every dinner had leopards at the table, but enough did to brand the practice in memory. The food reflects the animal theme too. Platters arrive with dishes made from creatures as bizarre as the live ones paraded through. Roasted ostrich drizzled with honey vinegar sauce, sausages made from lamprey eel, even tiny songbirds glazed in fig syrup. The courtesan at your side plucks an ostrich morsel with her fingers, offering it to you with a grin. You chew carefully, the meat stringy but the flavour lost beneath its sauce. It's food designed not for taste but for shock, proof that Rome can consume anything. A senator boasts loudly that he once dined on camel's hump in Alexandria. Another insists he tasted giraffe, though others scoff, doubting the claim. These stories matter less for their truth than for the prestige of having them. The courtesans laugh, egging the men on as if they were swapping tales of lovers instead of beasts. One woman strokes the parrot's feathers until it mutters, "Bebamus! Let's drink!" and the whole room raises their goblets at the bird's command. Quirky superstition arises when the peacock lets out a shrill cry, piercing enough to silence conversation. Some Romans believed peacocks brought bad luck with their cries, their feathers resembling the all-seeing eyes of the gods. A few senators crossed themselves instinctively, not the Christian sign, not yet, but a protective gesture, as though warding off envy. The host laughs it off, raising his cup to toast the bird's voice. Still the unease lingers, fluttering just under the torchlight. The leopard growls again, pulling against its handler. This time, the chain rattles so hard that the nearest courtesan flinches into your side. Hawknose, emboldened by wine, calls for the beast to be released into the courtyard, promising wagers on who it will chase first. The suggestion earns raucous cheers, but the handler's knuckles whiten on the chain. You can feel the air tense, the fragile line between amusement and catastrophe stretching thin as silk. You glance around the room. Senators grin like boys daring one another at a cliff's edge. Courtesans giggle, but the sound has an edge too sharp to be real. Slaves hover nervously, eyes flicking to exits, and in the centre the host beams, basking in the spectacle he's conjured. Whether the leopard lunges or stays leashed, he's already won. His feast will be remembered, exaggerated, immortalised in rumour. That's the real point. You sip your wine, the taste of ostrich still clinging to your tongue, and wonder how far Rome can push indulgence before spectacle tips into tragedy. Tonight, the line is a leash stretched taut between a leopard's teeth and a senator's cheer, and you're not sure which side will snap first. The leopard's growl hangs in the rafters like a note you can't resolve. The handler plants his feet, the chain sings. Half the room leans forward with wine-bright courage that would curdle in daylight. The host reads the moment the way a sailor reads sky and spits of foam. One clap, sharp conductor clean, and the door to the peristyle yawns open. "A lap of honour," he says cheerfully, "for dignity's sake." Coins flicker from rings into the handler's palm, and the leopard is walked out backward, eyes glowing, anger stitched up in its stride. The room exhales with laughter that pretends it never held its breath. Danger is only delicious when it stops one step short of your throat. "What next?" someone calls, drunk on relief. The answer arrives on silver, a servant bearing a tray of little sealed parcels, each tied with red thread and tagged with a witty couplet on the papyrus. The clever-eyed slave you keep noticing is right behind him, arms full of more. Apophyeta, marble smile crows. The take-home gifts, but Roman style, which means some are boons and some are jokes. "Let's wager," the host purrs. "A prize for one, a penalty for another. Fortune's finger will do the pointing, the table will do the clapping." The parcels make their rounds. A senator unties his to find a gold brooch winking like a tame star. His neighbour opens his and reveals a cabbage. The room roars. Another guest pulls a small bronze phallus on a cord, blushes theatrically, and loops it around his neck to cheers. You undress your package to discover a tiny wax tablet and stylus, useful, sly, and somehow funnier than the cabbage. Your courtesan steals it, scratches a quick caricature of Hawknose, it's the eyebrows, and flashes it to you like a secret. Historical fact to anchor the mischief. Apophyeta really were a thing, especially at Saturnalia, where Martial composed whole books of epigrams to tag gifts from grand to groan, warm cloaks, cheap lamps, jars of olives, even live geese. At banquets too, hosts sometimes distributed lots for takeaways, part generosity, part theatre. The line between feast and festival was a ribbon Rome tied and untied at will. But the host didn't promise only delight. "Steaks," he says, clapping once more. A slave brings a bowl carved of veined onyx. From it, the host pulls 2 tablets at a time and reads the names in pairs, a draw that makes the room buzz. Winner directs a boon, loser endures a forfeit. The first forfeit is mild, drink from a Rhyton without spilling a drop. The loser splutters wine down his tunic, The room howls, and a slave appears with a towel and the unsmiling efficiency of someone who has saved worse nights. Then it tips. The next drawer pairs a red-faced senator with the boy who juggled figs earlier. The senator wins and grins. "Let the boy sing," he declares, magnanimous, and the boy does. Clear voice, a hymn learned in a kitchen, rising over the clink of cups. It's moving unexpectedly, and for a heartbeat the room remembers that humans exist. But the next winner chooses a different track. He orders a household slave to kneel beneath the table, holding a tray on outstretched palms. "Until I say," he adds, lazy as a cat in a patch of sun. The courtesans laugh on cue. The slave's arms start to shake long before anyone looks away. Your courtesan leans into your shoulder. "Games," she murmurs, soft sarcasm. "Roman for someone else's discomfort." Quirky and cold Stultor floats up like a splinter. Vedius Pollio, a knight of obscene wealth and worse temper, is said to have kept a pool of lampreys to which he fed slaves who broke a cup. Augustus himself, guest at dinner, once stepped in, smashed crystal on purpose, and ordered all the fancy ware destroyed rather than a man. Is the tale embroidered? Maybe, but it survives because it rings too neatly, like truth sharpened for a parable. Cruelty as hobby rebuked by the theatre from a higher throne. Tonight's forfeits aren't teeth and blood, but you can feel the family resemblance. The dice arrive in a shallow silver dish for Astragali again, bone knuckle bones clacking like little hooves. "Kiss the bones for luck," a courtesan cries, smearing a little saffron on hers, and the table obliges. The game morphs into a round of call the throw, name your number, drink if you miss, assign a forfeit if you hit. Someone calls the high cast, hits it, and orders 2 gladiators. Where did they come from? To demonstrate with wooden swords, rudely polished like instruments. The men bow, touch staves, and begin a controlled dance of taps and feints, muscle turning under oil, faces blank. The wagers ride on them as if they were horses. How many passes before first touch? Which man will overreach? Whether anyone will smile? When a staff kisses a shoulder harder than planned, the whole table sucks a breath like fish in a net. The host raises a hand, the bout stops on a needle. Coins change direction. The men bow again, expressionless, and vanish as efficiently as they appeared. Scholarly debate sidles in wearing a neutral cloak. How common were scenes like this in real Roman dining rooms? Petronius's Satyricon gives us a caricatured feast bursting with performances and punishments. Trimalchio's grotesque fantasia. But it's satire, not courtroom minutes. Some historians argue such cruelty was a pen dipped in envy. Others point to piles of exotic bones in elite dumps, to letters glancing off ugly habits, to moralists foaming about chairs cushioned with human lives, and say, if satire aimed there, it probably had a target worth hitting. As for Pollio and his lampreys, scholars tussle over details, but ancient voices agreeing in their disgust tell their own story. The forfeits grow stranger. One loser must balance an egg on a spoon while walking the mosaic dolphins. He shakes so hard the egg trembles like a moon about to fall. Another must stand blindfolded while a courtesan kisses his cheek and a senator slaps the other. He has to guess which is which by warmth alone. The room howls when he calls it wrong and gets both cheeks pecked for his trouble. Harmless, you think, until the bowl spits out 2 names that should never meet. A proud senator and the clever-eyed slave. Switch places, the winner says, eyes bright with mischief you don't trust. He reclines, you serve. There's laughter, lots of it. Nervous this time, a little too loud. The host hesitates the half-breath that matters. Then, a cleverer forfeit, he redirects smoothly. The slave chooses a poem, the senator recites. The room shifts on its cushions, relieved by his mercy disguised as wit. The slave, without looking up, selects 2 lines from Catullus, mild enough by that poet's standards, and the senator's metre limps through them like a mule trying stairs. The applause belongs to the host more than the verse. The room has been tugged back from a darker edge without being told it was near one. Another round of parcels, a second wave of apophoretto arrives, and this set is more obviously barbed. One holds a polished mirror, its pair holds a shard of green glass. One offers a sprig of laurel, its twin holds a single black bean, omen of unlucky lots. A courtesan wins a tiny vial of lily oil and dabs her throat with a grin. The man beside her opens a packet of kitchen salt and tries to look like he meant to. Your own parcel cracks open to reveal a little clay lamp moulded into a skeleton dancing. memento mori in terracotta. The oil within is already scented with myrtle. Charming, your courtesan says, kissing your temple, and accurate. Another game, a voice calls, Silver Fox, whose smile never learned modesty. Kotabos, a Greek import, old-fashioned by now but hard to kill, fling the wine dregs from your cup to strike a target. The host indulges him. A slave sets a small metal disc on a stand, and the crowd forms a loose ring. Bets appear like mushrooms after rain. You try it, flick, arc, splash, and your wine kisses the edge of the disc with an undistinguished tink. Laurel Wreath shows off and nails the centre. Hawknose misses entirely and has to kiss the disc that kissed the floor, to jeers. A debate hums under the fun. Did Romans ever love this game the way Greeks did, or are we playing at scholarship to justify spilling? And the answer tonight is plainly, who cares? The cruelty returns on slippered feet. A losing throw condemns a kitchen slave to hold a tray high again. His arms quiver, then rise, then quiver. Your courtesan's jaw tightens. Her laughter goes absent for 3 heartbeats. You look for the host. He is already looking for the moment to repurpose mercy again. When the parrot squawks, "Bebemus!" at the perfect second, the host seizes it. Yes, let's drink to reprieves. He knocks a knuckle on the table. The burdened boy is swapped out for a stand, and the room pretends that was always the plan. The bowl of names runs low. One last pairing draws the handler of the leopard and Hawknose himself. "Release the cat," Hawknose says, feral with drink. "Let it decide whom it likes least." The handler's hands clench. The room skitters on the edge again. Your throat dries. The host doesn't blink. "Better," he says, smiling as if the suggestion had been delightful. "Let the cat decide whom it likes most." He tosses the handler a gold torque. "Feed it in the courtyard, a whole hare. No audience. Gods deserve privacy." Laughter rolls. The danger bleeds off like steam. Hawknose has to settle for a different cruelty. He orders Silver Fox to recite a love poem to the parrot. The parrot answers with a belch word it learned from a drunk stable boy. The room dissolves into helpless, grateful laughter. You breathe. Your lamp's little skeleton dances in your palm. Oil scent a green whisper. The night has shown you how power plays delight and pain like notes, quick trills or long drones, always with the option to drag the bow harder. The clever-eyed slave passes by and for the first time lets his gaze brush yours for a fraction. It's as close as a nod in a room that doesn't allow him to have a face. You feel the spikenard you wore earlier lift in the heat, a faint mountain under the sea. The drum resumes its sleepy pulse. Somewhere near a column, a man in a plain cloak, philosopher by the look, watches with an expression that sums to not surprised. Tomorrow he'll call this vice. Tonight it's just the next round. You notice him again. The man in the plain cloak you clocked near the column when the leopard almost made the night famous for the wrong reasons. He's where you'd expect him, a little apart in the half-shadow between 2 torch pools, with the kind of face that could pass for either patience or boredom depending on your guilt. The beard is neat, the eyes clear, the cup modestly full and never quite empty. Beside him perches another specimen, shaggier, wrapped in a rough cloak that might once have been a blanket, a staff leaning against his knee and a small wallet at his feet. Stoic and cynic. The comedy writes itself. Your lamp, the tiny clay memento mori with the dancing skeleton, still rests warm in your palm, smelling faintly of myrtle. As you drift toward the quiet corner, the stoic's gaze flicks to it and back to your face with one of those almost smiles philosophers use when they're about to hand you common sense wrapped like a compliment. "A good companion," he says, nodding at the little skeleton. "Better than a cupbearer who never stops pouring." The cynic snorts. "Better than a senator who never stops promising." Then he fishes an olive from a wooden dish and bites it pitilessly in half. The soundscape from the couches doesn't quite reach here as words, more like weather, laughter fronts, clinks of hail, the occasional thunderclap of a toast. The philosophers sit as if they've pulled their own climate around them, sturdy and slightly draughty. Your courtesan hovers a respectful step behind, sceptical and curious in equal measure. You take the olive the stoic offers, plain, briny, as honest as a doorstep, and feel your mouth remember what non-theatre tastes like. Historical fact to hang on the wall between you. Romans expected banquets to host talk as well as food. Plutarch even wrote a whole book of it, Table Talk, where dinner guests argued about everything from whether sea or land provides better delicacies to how much salt makes sense on greens, and then detoured into ethics because philosophy can't resist a good detour. Wealthy houses hired tutors and philosophers to educate their children or to polish the family voice. Some of those thinkers ended up at couches like these, invited as conversation ornaments, rescues, or mirrors. Seneca advised an emperor by day and complained about bad table manners by night. Tonight's corner is an old room in a new house. "What did you see?" the Stoic asks, not unkindly, which is rarer than you'd think in a man trained to cut problems in half. You think of the handler's white knuckles on the leopard's chain, of a boy's shaking arms beneath a tray, of the host's quick mercies disguised as jokes. Plenty, you say. Too much. The cynic grins, teeth bright. Good. The appetite is the teacher, satiety is a liar. He plucks a piece of barley bread from a basket and blows a crumb off as if it were a senator's excuse. He's the one the room calls dog behind its hand, Kinnikos dog-like, but he looks more like a cat that has seen kitchens on fire and survived. He rolls his shoulders under the rough cloak and eyes your wreath like it's a pet you'll forget to feed. "You all dress your hunger in ivy," he says. "Then call it God so you don't have to call it yours." The Stoic coughs lightly, a social break. "Desire," he says, "is not a sin. Letting desire steer the chariot is foolishness. The reins are yours or they are nothing." Quirky fact to tuck into the napkin of your mind. Some philosophers came with their own food rules. Pythagoreans famously shunned beans, depending on whom you ask, to avoid flatulence at solemn moments, or because beans looked like little souls, or because politics is messy and so are beans. The cynic taps the bean in your second favorita parcel with a fingernail and winks. "Another republic saved," he says. Your courtesan hides a laugh in her cup. The Stoic gestures to the feast with 2 fingers. "You see the games they call harmless?" he asks. "Each one is a small training. Either you practice taking cruelty as entertainment, or you practice stopping it with your voice." He nods toward the host. "That one practices mercy as a trick and as a skill. Better than most." You think of the onyx bowl, the quivering arms, the parrot's timely bebermus, the host's redirection dressed as wit. You hadn't noticed you were grateful until now. Open scholarly debate slides into your lap the way a cat claims a sun patch. How much did people like this man practice what they preached? Seneca wrote rolling rivers of Stoic ethics and also, inconveniently, possessed an estate large enough to embarrass a modest volcano. Later readers argue about whether that makes him a hypocrite or a realist chained to a golden desk in a bad emperor's office. Some scholars say the Stoic wardrobe fit loosely over cushioned chairs, that philosophy served as perfume in rooms like these. Others answer that Stoicism's engine is internal, and wealth in a dangerous court is a hazard some men try to navigate with ideas as their oars. You look at the man beside you, plain cloak, steady eyes, olive in hand, and feel the debate press its forehead to your shoulder without deciding to stay. The cynic leans closer, conspiratorial. "Do you know the story?" he asks. A philosopher at a dinner refuses the spiced wine and the perfumed napkin. The host asks why he came. "To see fools up close," he says. He pops the other half of the olive into his mouth and adds, deadpan, "Come yum as we charge a fee." Your courtesan coughs to hide the smile that escapes anyway. The Stoic points to your lamp again. "Keep that," he says. "Men at triumphs have a slave in the chariot whispering memento mori. Remember you're mortal. Here," he gestures to the lion-coloured slabs of meat, to the girl's anklets, to the dice and the little bronze phallus on a cord. "No one hires such a servant. You will have to be your own." Historical aside, in case you need the receipt, the whisperer in the triumph is a thing Roman writers love to repeat. Whether the line was actually spoken or simply became a story Romans told about themselves, proud and cautious at once, scholars argue. Either way, the image sticks like resin. A crown and a caution sharing a head. You ask the question floating under your tongue, why stay at the feast? The cynic barks a laugh. Because leaving is also theatre, and I'm bad at exits. The Stoic's answer is slower. Because people you love will be here anyway. Because someone must learn to hold steady near a drunk edge. Because practice requires weights, and vice is heavy. He lifts his cup, watered, yes, but not empty, and meets your eyes. Also, he adds with satisfying honesty, because figs taste good. The music sneaks a new phrase through the curtains, and you catch a scent of laurel again as a slave passes with a brazier. The cynic sniffs like a hound. "Perfume," he says, mock solemn. The Empire's apology. The Stoic doesn't rise to the bait. He watches Hawknose across the room with the doctor's face. See him? He mistakes noise for courage. Tomorrow he will pretend he didn't ask for the cat. The Cynic grins, sharp. Tomorrow he will blame Liber. Quirky superstition makes a cameo. The Stoic remarks that some people swear amethyst protects against drunkenness. He taps his plain iron ring and says dryly, "Not mine." The Cynic, who has no ring at all, wiggles his empty finger. "I wear poverty," he says, "fits any occasion." Your courtesan, bare-handed except for bangles, tilts her wrist as if to compare. The three of you look momentarily like a tiny senate arguing about jewellery. A slave bows in, offering you a plate of greens. You recognise the rocket leaves from earlier, the aphrodisiac salad. The Cynic takes a pinch and chews with theatrical bliss. "Behold," he says, "virtue inflamed by vegetables." The Stoic rolls his eyes so gently you almost miss it. "Eat," he tells you. Not because the leaf promises anything foolish, but because hunger makes fools of the best of us. You do, and the pepper speaks bright and green down your tongue, cutting the peacock's ghost and the ostrich rumour. The scholarly debate takes a second lap. Did philosophers really haunt rich men's dinners like brand mascots for moderation? Some evidence says yes. Letters, moral essays, satirical portraits that only work if audiences recognise the type. Others point out that the loudest examples are literary, not minutes from a household ledger, and warn us against assuming every villa had a Stoic on a stool by the door. You look around this particular villa and decide that whether or not it was common, the casting is perfect tonight. Someone needed to be the grown-up. Two someones arrived. "Your wreath," the Stoic says softly, nodding at the ivy tilting over your ear, "was made for a god of loosening. Keep it if you like, but remember who decides the knot." The Cynic toasts with a crumb of bread. "And if you must loosen," he says, "do it where the floor is taut." He jerks his chin toward the careful-eyed slave moving through the room. That one understands which carpets hide fewer holes. Your lamp's little skeleton seems to jitter in time with the drum, a ridiculous, charming metronome. The Stoic lifts his cup to it and then to you. "May your night end with a memory you can use," he says. The Cynic adds, "and with both shoes," gesturing at the neat row of red ones by the wall, which suddenly looks like a museum of absent feet. Somewhere in the triclinium the parrot shouts, "Evo!" as if on cue. Somewhere else the host's laugh folds the room back into motion. You pocket the lamp, breathe once through the laurel and wine and myrtle and stand. The corner has steadied your feet without sobering the night. The philosophers do what good anchors do, hold without shouting, keep their own weather, let others find them when the tide gets clever. As you turn back toward the couches, the Cynic gives you a salute with his staff, half mockery, half blessing. The Stoic simply inclines his head as if to say, "Go practice." You return from the philosopher's corner with the little clay lamp tucked at your side like a private joke, only to find the temperature of the feast has shifted again. The drum is quicker, the flute higher, the torches guttering as if they too are drunk. The host sits forward, cheeks ruddy, goblet lifted like a general brandishing his standard. "Shall we honour Liber properly?" he booms, and just like that, the air thickens. Not the easy laughter of dice games or the sharp crack of forfeits. This is heavier, stranger, edging toward ritual. A slave enters bearing a silver mask of Bacchus, vines engraved along its cheeks, eyes hollow. He places it on the host's head. The room cheers, half in delight, half in recognition of what's coming. Courtesans weave ivy wreaths tighter, draping them across bare shoulders. Senators slap the couches as if to summon the god into their veins. Even the parrot on its perch croaks "Evoe" and earns applause. Historical fact to anchor the swirl. The Bacchanalia, the ancient festivals of Bacchus, were infamous in Rome. Introduced from Greece, they mixed wine, dance, and mystery rites. By 186 BCE, the Senate tried to suppress them, accusing the cult of wild orgies, secret murders, and conspiracies. Livy's account reads like a scandal sheet. Men and women mingling at night, torches snuffed, crimes hidden in frenzy. Scholars argue whether the panic was exaggerated propaganda or real fear of political gatherings outside senatorial control. Either way, Bacchus became shorthand for both liberation and danger. Tonight, the host is daring that shadow right into his dining room. The cynic's words echo in your head. You dress your hunger in ivy and call it God. Watching now, you see exactly what he meant. Laurel wreath, hair tangled, lifts his cup and shouts a hymn line. He probably hasn't rehearsed since boyhood. Hawknose pours wine straight over his head until it runs into his beard, laughing like a man who knows he'll regret nothing until the morning makes him. Silver Fox kisses the mouth of a courtesan who isn't the one he entered with. The host pounds the table in rhythm with the drum, chanting Yo Bacche, Yo Evoe, until others join, until the room feels less like a senate's extension and more like a hillside grove in some Greek play. Quirky detail, some Bacchic rites used rattles and drums to summon frenzy. Women, maenads, were said to whirl until they tore animals apart with bare hands, eating raw flesh in a trance. Whether that ever literally happened or was moral panic embroidered by historians is debated, but the imagery stuck. Bacchus was the god who dissolved boundaries between men and women, sober and drunk, civilized and wild. Tonight, courtesans whirl with anklets flashing, hair undone, while senators clap and stomp until their rings rattle. Boundaries are dissolving like wax near a flame. Your courtesan grabs your hand and yanks you up before you can refuse. She spins, hair flaring, pressing your palm against her hip, then pulls you into the circling line of dancers. Senators, courtesans, even slaves drawn into the orbit, all whirl together around the table where the peacock carcass still glistens. It's a cyclone of silk and flesh, ivy and sweat. And the chant rises into something primal. Not language anymore, but a single shared cry. You feel the weight of your lamp in your robe pocket, the stoic's caution rattling like a stone, and for a heartbeat, you have to choose, resist or whirl. You whirl. A scholarly debate rides in on that dizziness. Did Romans actually host Bacchic rites inside banquets? Or is that modern imagination running too far? Some argue that by the Empire, Bacchus was domesticated, his worship folded into harmless theatre. Others insist fragments of the wild cult lingered in elite play. The secret rooms, the dancers, the songs at midnight. The evidence is slippery, deliberately so. Cults lived in half shadows, where exaggeration did their advertising. You watching senators pound couches like drums while women twirl like flames can't tell if this is parody or survival of something older and wilder. The host rises, crowned in silver Bacchus, and calls for a bowl of wine so vast it takes 4 men to carry it. Into it he pours amphora after amphora until the air is sticky with Falernian vapour. He drops in herbs, thyme, rosemary, maybe even opium seeds if rumour serves, and stirs it with a ladle taller than a child. Communion, he declares, and each guest drinks in turn, lips touching the rim like a ritual kiss. When the bowl comes to you, the wine is heavy, sweet, burning. You drink, and the world tilts another degree toward fever. Quirky superstition bubbles up. Romans believed ivy was sacred to Bacchus because it never withered, its green-defying seasons. They wore it as protection from drunkenness, an irony so rich you almost laugh when you notice Hawknose clutching his wreath as he staggers. He mutters about immortality, about ivy twining through his veins, and your courtesan whispers, "It won't save his stomach." The frenzy sharpens. Courtesans crawl onto couches, tipping goblets into senators' mouths like priestesses offering libation. Men strip their tunics to the waist, daubing their chests with wine, calling themselves satyrs. Someone smashes a plate deliberately, declaring it a sacrifice to the god. The parrot shrieks incoherent syllables that sound in the heat of the moment like prophecy. And the drum, always the drum, pounds faster, harder, until you feel it in your ribs. Yet beneath the revel, a darker current flows. You hear a senator whispering in the ear of the dominer's half-reclining companion. His words wrapped in the chant, but not lost. Promises about land, threats about votes. Another man, eyes glassy, leans too close to a courtesan who glances toward the host for help. Politics hasn't left the room. It's just wearing ivy instead of togas. The host, drunk on his own theatre, raises the silver mask. "Tonight," he declares, "we are not senators or slaves, not wives or courtesans. We are Bacchus together." The crowd roars, the chant swelling again. For a moment, the claim feels true. You whirl in ivy, lips sticky with wine. ears ringing with Evo, and realise you've stepped into the skin of an old rumour. This is what the Senate once feared. Boundaries undone, bodies ungoverned, order drowned in grapes and drumbeats. And it's happening not in some back-alley cult, but right here in the marble belly of power. The drum stops. Silence falls like a blade. The host lowers the mask, breathless, sweat shining on his cheeks. For a heartbeat you think the spell will shatter, that reason will seep back in. Instead, the silence holds, heavier than noise. Everyone stares at everyone else, panting, flushed, masked in nothing but themselves. Then a laugh cracks it, too loud, too wild, and the cell room tumbles forward again, deeper than before. The silence after the Bacchic frenzy is brief, but it leaves the room oddly raw, like a wound washed clean with wine. Senators recline again. Courtesans gather their silks back into place, but something invisible has shifted. The air is charged, almost metallic, as if every breath carries the taste of risk. Laughter resumes, but it's thinner now, tighter. Like a drum stretched one turn too far. Beneath it runs a quieter music. Whispers, heads bent close, promises and threats that no liar could drown. You notice Hawknose first. He leans towards Silver Fox, voice low, hand gripping the older man's forearm with a pressure that's not casual. You can't catch the words, but you read the tension in their shoulders, the tilt of Silver Fox's head as if weighing something heavier than gossip. At another couch, Marble Smile has drawn two courtesans around him like curtains, but behind their laughter his lips move against the ear of a provincial governor. The courtesans giggle louder than the joke deserves, drowning the words from all but the intended. Politics has slipped into the feast as stealthily as incense, and now it perfumes every breath. Historical fact for context: Roman banquets were notorious sites of political manoeuvring. Cicero complained in his letters that deals were struck more often over wine than in the curia. Alliances, conspiracies and betrayals could begin in a toast and end in a dagger. Even Augustus, careful image builder, used dinners to bind allies, shaping his household as a miniature empire. To eat together was to negotiate together. The table was as much Senate floor as the marble chamber outside. The courtesan at your side notices it too. She leans in, lips brushing your ear, and whispers, "Hear them? The feast is only the curtain. The play's behind it." She draws her finger across your chest, not seductively, but like a diagram. Food, wine, song, these are stage props. What matters is whispered when no one looks. You realise she isn't just decoration, she's audience, observer, sometimes participant. Courtesans remember everything. Carry rumours between men as easily as they carry perfume on their wrists. Quirky fact, in Roman scandal sheets, courtesans were sometimes accused of being spies, because they could cross social boundaries, moving from senator to senator, from feast to feast. They gathered secrets no male official could. Satirists loved to paint them as dangerous sirens, not only because of lust, but because of information. Whether that was paranoia or shrewd observation is debated, but sitting here you believe it. The courtesan beside you could topple half the room if she repeated what she overhears tonight. The scholarly debate glimmers in the torchlight. How accurate were the ancient accounts of conspiracies born at feasts? Some historians argue that writers exaggerated to moralise, "Look how Rome rots from indulgence." Others point to specific conspiracies with banquet fingerprints. Catiline's plot in 63 BCE allegedly involved wine-fueled oaths. Sejanus, Tiberius's infamous advisor, was said to weave webs over the dinner. Even Messalina's downfall, if you trust the gossip, was tied to revels too wild for imperial patience. The line between history and satire blurs like wine diluted past recognition, but the effect is the same. Romans expected danger to ferment alongside Falernian. Your courtesan gestures subtly. Laurel Wreath is in conference now with the dominor's half-reclining companion, his voice urgent enough to pierce the flute music. You catch fragments. Grain, shortage, Ceres must be appeased. The woman nods, lips tight, as though storing the words for later delivery to someone who matters more. You sense a chain of whispers longer than any banquet table, carrying through courtesans, wives, slaves, until it reaches ears powerful enough to act or to punish. At the next couch, two senators argue with false smiles, their hands darting in gestures sharper than their tones. One says Asia like a curse, the other replies Egypt with the smile of a knife. The courtesan between them claps her hands, pretending it's a drinking game, but you can see her eyes dart between them, memorizing every syllable. Tomorrow she'll trade that knowledge like coin. Quirky superstition sidles in too. A senator cuts his palm slightly with the rim of a broken cup and smears the blood into his wine. His neighbour does the same, the two drinking together in what looks uncomfortably like a pact sealed with blood. You recall that Roman soldiers sometimes swore oaths over sacrifice, mixing blood and wine. Here, in Torchlight, the gesture feels both parody and sincerity. Are they mocking ritual or binding themselves in it? You can't tell, and neither can the room. The stoic from earlier watches with narrowed eyes, the faintest shake of his head. The cynic laughs outright, loud enough for you to hear across the din. He shouts, "Drink your blood, men of law! Rome will bleed enough without your help!" A few senators glare, but most ignore him. That's the trick of a cynic. He says the unsayable, and everyone pretends it's jest even when it isn't. You sip your own wine cautiously, listening to the undercurrent. A phrase rises, "The emperor will know nothing," then vanishes in laughter. Another, a name struck from the rolls, gets swallowed by a courtesan's kiss. The room looks like revelry, but beneath the ivy masks, it's a tangle of plots and promises. Historical aside, Roman historians themselves debated how much truth survived in accounts of conspiracies. Tacitus often hinted at plots in vague terms, careful not to accuse too directly. Suetonius preferred scandal, gleefully detailing whisper chains. Modern scholars sift those accounts, unsure where truth ends and theatre begins. Sitting here, you realise that's the point. The line between truth and theatre was never clean. Rome itself was built on blurred lines. Your courtesan whispers again, her voice smooth as oil. "Don't look now, but 2 men just wagered the governorship of a province." You choke on your wine. She smiles, enjoying your shock. Not officially, of course, but listen. You strain, and sure enough, one man boasts about a year's harvest guaranteed. The other counters with, "My legion owes me." The courtesans applaud, pretending it's a drinking boast, but you see the deal slip into place like dice landing just so. The host claps again, louder this time, breaking the tension. "A toast," he declares, his silver Bacchus mask now resting on the table. "To unity, to Rome." Everyone raises goblets, and the words echo like armour. But you know, and they know, that unity is as thin as the watered wine in your cup. Rome isn't united here. It's fractured, whispered, negotiated, and tomorrow the Senate will vote as if this night never happened. You glance toward your lamp, the little skeleton dancing, and remember the Stoic's words, "Be your own whisperer." You wonder how many men here will remember the same. At some point the night loosens its grip and slides into that grey hour the Romans called Gallicinium. Cock crow, though roosters are the least of what you hear. It starts as a heartbeat under the chatter. A muffled boom, boom, boom from beyond the peristyle, too regular to be chance. Not the drum that whipped the room into ivy-drunk circles, but a steadier thud, as if dawn itself is knocking. The orchestra of the city is tuning up, the clatter of cartwheels on stone, the bark of a mongrel, a water seller calling a price and threading through it, those morning drums. The host grins like a man who planned even sunrise. "A wake-up hymn," he says and gestures. Street musicians shimmer in, Tiburcines with the long reed pipes tucked under their arms, a pair of boys with frame drums, beating soft and sure, a sistrum jangling that unmistakable bright-boned sound from the cult of Isis. The rhythm slides under the torches and pushes the tired edges back a pace. "We salute the sun," Marble Smile intones in a voice that hopes for poetry and lands on parody, but the sentiment sticks. A courtesan lifts her face toward the paling oculus and yawns like a cat accepting divinity on her own terms. The villa itself begins to pivot toward morning. Slaves open high shutters so the sky can seep in. Violet shading to pearl. Fresh rushes are scattered. The last of the incense curls away. Somewhere deep in the house a bath's furnace sighs. Oil boys, alipila, appear with little flasks and strigils, ready to scrape a night's worth of choices off any senator who wants to face breakfast in a cleaner skin. The clever-eyed slave who has shepherded you through so many corners passes with a tray of warm water and cloths. The grateful sounds he collects could be a second hymn. Historical fact to hang on this pale frame: Roman nights ran long. A proper scena stretched into commissatio, and plenty of sources, Pliny grumbling, Petronius smirking suggest more than a few dinners crashed into dawn. And just as predictably, morning meant business. The salutatio, clients lining up at a patron's door to offer greetings and receive the day's sportula, that little basket of favour. Somewhere, even now, men are arranging their togas in atria, practising modest smiles while here their patrons are drinking from bowls the size of bathtubs. A cock crows in the courtyard as if on cue, and the parrot answers salve with the pugminis of an employee who knows he can't be fired. Hawknose glares at the bird as if it owes him a vote. Silverfox is trying to coax a final laugh from a courtesan who has achieved the glaze-eyed serenity of someone calculating precisely how much sleep she can buy with a brisk bath and a forgiving pillow. Laurel Wreath, to his credit, straightens his wreath and attempts a hymn to Aurora that gets 2 lines in before collapsing gently into a compliment for the host's mosaics. You feel the Stoic's lamp, a warm coin at your hip. The little dancing skeleton has become a private metronome. Each drum outside taps a "remember" against your ribs. Your courtesan nudges your cup aside and trades it for a clay beaker of watered posca, the sour salt soldier's drink. "Trust me," she says, "your head tomorrow will thank the gods you doubt." She steals a sip herself, mouth puckering, then grins. You drink. Your tongue remembers vinegar's work ethic. Quirky remedy time, Cato the Elder swore cabbage could cure almost anything, drunkenness included. Boil it, chew it, rub it. Cabbage is a miracle in leaves. Pliny dutifully passed on the gospel. Whether it works or not, a slave now glides through with a tray of greens glistening from a pot, and no one laughs too loudly before taking some. The room smells briefly like a respectable garden. A senator mutters, "For Cato," as if that absolves the peacock. Your courtesan taps your bowl with her nail. Eat. It's tradition. And tradition is the only thing that survives these nights without a headache. Outside, the drums tilt brighter, closer to parade than pulse, and the sistrum flares as the ISIS boys step the beat toward the street. The host waves them on with a coin and a bow. Their rhythm carries into the waking city like a rumour with shoes. With the windows open, you catch a fresher note. Bread. The pistrina nearby has opened its doors. Hot loaves are slapping onto boards. A donkey traces sleepy circles at the mill. It's amazing what mercy bread can be to a room that's tried to eat the world. Open scholarly debate slips its foot through the door with the bread scent. Was Rome truly a city that never slept? Some scholars argue the night teemed. Bakers, water carriers, taverns, even courts catching the cool hours. Others insist that darkness was danger, that vigils are Rome's firefighters' night watch, and magistrates discouraged nocturnal traffic, that curfew-like limits pulsed under certain emperors. Evidence exists for both. A city of 4-hour hum, and a city that pulled its shutters tight. Tonight, from this villa, you hear both the drums and the hush between them, and believe Rome lived in layers, some sleeping, some scheming, some kneading dough for men who don't remember names until noon. The host claps softly, almost tender now, and orders a morning course. It's modest by his standards. Olives, cheese, honey, hot bread torn and passed, a dish of dates to soften the vinegar. The courtesans circle back into competence, smoothing hair, laughing in lower chords, coaxing their senators into sitting up and up straight so they don't look like shipwrecks when the sun finishes the reveal. The gladiators from the forfeits, remember them, reappear as if they never left, now carrying baskets instead of staves, anonymous again under the job-stripped light. Hawknose, who almost ordered a cat loosed for sport, is nursing Posca like a penitent. Marble Smile is negotiating something about a temple inscription with the half-reclining lady who dared to recline. She corrects his wording with a neatness that suggests she will get the last edit as well as the last word. Laurel Wreath remembers a single clean stanza about dawn and manages to land it without gasping. Everyone applauds like parents at a school performance. The parrot, not to be outdone, squawks, "Bibermus," and is ignored for the first time all night. Progress. A slave swings a door toward the atrium, testing the hinge on the day. Cold air brushes your skin, then warms. Light licks the marble. Out there, the first clients of the morning are already gathering, their sandals making small, careful sounds. You picture their faces when the doors open fully, the smell of myrrh chasing peacock fat, the shuffle of courtesans like petals that refuse to wilt, their patron's wreath dented, his dignity pressed and still drying. Rome's favourite sport is pretending nothing happened. This morning the game will be Olympic. The Stoic and the Cynic remain in their corner, the former with a crust of bread, the latter with a satisfied smirk and a stolen olive. The Stoic catches your eye and touches his temple, a reminder, not a rebuke. The Cynic raises his empty cup, which seems like a joke until you realise it isn't one. The clever-eyed slave stops at your couch, sets down a folded linen with a fig tucked into the knot, and lets his gaze meet yours for half a second. Professional congratulations, perhaps, on having survived this far with your shoes. Then he is gone, absorbed back into the room's necessary invisibility. You chew bread, and the city chews time. The drums outside fade into hoofbeats, the sistrum into the squeak of a cart. The moon button in the oculus winks out, replaced by a smear of gold. Someone laughs too loudly, someone sighs and means it. The host, maestro to the end, lifts his cup, now sensibly thin with water. "Friends," he says, and the word finally sounds like it belongs to people rather than to a script. "The day is shameless." The room chuckles, grateful for permission to be tired. "Eat, wash, lie for a while," he adds, "and then go tell Rome how well-behaved we were." Laughter again, softer. Quirky omen pricks the moment. A small owl, Athena's bird, Minerva's too, flits across the open court and perches on the roof beam, head pivoting with that unsettling, coin-eyed poise. Some Romans count owls as bad luck, death whisperers in feather. Others, wiser, call them cleverness perched near a lamp. The parrot gasps theatrically, and half the room crosses some version of itself. The host salutes the bird with bread. "Wisdom sees all," he says. "Let her see us eat breakfast." The owl blinks once, then vanishes as if it were only a punchline. The debate about lead pops back in your head uninvited. Did last night's sweetened wine carry saturnine poison into skulls that already hurt? Some scholars lean yes, pointing to defrutum boiled in lead-lined pots, to brittle bones in elite remains. Others argue the doses were uneven, the evidence thin, the fall of empires too complicated to pin on syrup. You sip your vinegar and decide that regardless, water and sleep are better gods right now than any grape-born chemistry. A final drumbeat wanders down the street and loses itself in mourning. The villa settles into the dull, blessed business of ending a party. Cushions shaken, trays stacked, a peacock feather found under a couch like the lost quill of a rumour. Your courtesan presses your lamp into your palm and kisses the spot where the clay warms your skin. "Take him home," she whispers, meaning the skeleton, meaning the reminder. "If anyone asks what you did, say you were educated." She smiles, light and a little sad. You were. Somewhere the first client clears his throat in the atrium. Somewhere else a baker's boy sings to keep from falling asleep on his feet. Inside, the last goblet clinks against a plate. Outside, the sun draws a line across the threshold under Priapus's old smirk. You stand, wreath slipping one final time, and face a day that will pretend night never happened. The drums are gone. The pulse remains. The villa exhales like a man who has held his breath too long, and suddenly you are walking out beneath the painted lintel into the atrium, sandals finding cool stone damp with dew, tracked in by slaves. Behind you, the banquet hall hums with the soft rustle of clearing away, the perfumed carcass of the night disassembled piece by piece, feathers swept, goblets rinsed, wreaths discarded like snakeskins. Before you, the city is waking, and you feel at once both ghostly and exposed like a shadow that hasn't decided which body to belong to. The atrium itself has transformed overnight. Clients gather in orderly clusters, eyes darting with the well-practiced choreography of men who must appear humble while measuring how much attention they'll receive. The smell is different here. Less incense, more wool cloaks, leather sandals damp with the morning. The wax masks of ancestors gaze down from niches, their eyes clouded with time, watching as if to ask what exactly their descendants have been up to all night. Priapus in the courtyard, still smirking beneath his perpetual erection, seems to mock the entire charade of sobriety. Historical fact to stitch into this tableau. The salutatio was a Roman mourning ritual, the dance of patron and client. Clients came early to greet their patron, hoping for sportula, a basket of food, a coin, a favour, sometimes just a smile that could be cashed later for protection. Patrons paraded their following like trophies, proof of influence. After a night like last, the continuity is absurd but crucial. Feast melts into ritual. Decadence dissolves into respectability. Rome ran on this two-stroke engine, hypocrisy and formality pumping in tandem. The host appears, refreshed disturbingly fast, draped in a new toga that gleams like morning itself. If not for the faint ivy stain still visible on his temple, you'd think he hadn't been pounding the table with a silver Bacchus mask hours ago. He greets his clients with studied warmth, one hand extended, the other discreetly hiding a yawn. They bow and smile, pretending not to smell the wine still hanging from his skin. Your courtesan lingers at your side now, reassembled into elegance, hair pinned again, jewels tidied. She murmurs, "This is the second act. Pretend to applaud." You watch as men who just whispered treason over peacock bones now nod solemnly about crops, debts, lawsuits. The dissonance is almost musical. Quirky fact, some Roman moralists accused the salutatio of being little more than theatre anyway. Marshall joked that some patrons lined up actors disguised as clients to make themselves look more important. Others claimed slaves were dressed as free men to bulk up the entourage, a parody within a performance, the morning's ritual no more real than the night's frenzy. You glance at the faces waiting here, some gaunt, some eager, some dulled by repetition, and wonder which are true clients and which are hired applause. From the atrium, you step into the street. Rome itself looks hungover. The paving stones glisten with last night's wine, or maybe Wilberforce with chamber pots emptied to form upper floors. Baker's smoke rises sharp and yeasty. Dogs nose at scraps and gutters. A cart creaks by, piled with amphorae, its driver singing tunelessly, his voice shredded from too many nights. A group of children dart past, laughing, chasing a hoop. One shouts, "Senator's drunk again!" and the others collapse in giggles. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. Historical note, mornings after feasts had real consequences. Pliny complained of senators too groggy to attend sessions, laws delayed by men nursing headaches. Suetonius tells of emperors showing up bleary-eyed to public ceremonies. Yet Rome tolerated it, maybe even expected it. Excess at night, duty by day, that was the unspoken pact. The contradiction was the point. You trail behind your courtesan through a market square. She's speaking low, passing snippets to another woman in pearls who joins your walk for a moment, then peels off. Information flowing already. Last night's whispers, last night's gestures, now turned into currency before the sun is even fully awake. The feast may be over, but its consequences are still cooking. Open scholarly debate. How much did these feasts actually influence politics? Some argue they were just diversions, gossip exaggerated into legend by moralists like Juvenal. Others suggest they were breeding grounds for alliances, conspiracies sealed over goblets rather than scrolls. The evidence is tantalizing but slippery. Stories of oaths, rumours of plots, scattered references that might be exaggerations. Yet even skeptics admit, power thrives where men feel unguarded, and nowhere were they less guarded than at a feast thick with wine and ivy. The courtesan tugs your sleeve, pulling you aside as a group of senators passes, their togas too fresh, their eyes too red. They're already rehearsing how they'll spend the morning in the Senate chamber. Perhaps a speech about piety, a reminder of Roman virtue, all delivered with voices still thick with last night's wine. The hypocrisy would be hilarious if it weren't the engine of empire. Quirky superstition drifts in as a funeral procession passes the far edge of the square. Mourners wail, their tunics torn, ashes sprinkled in their hair. Some Romans believed seeing a funeral at dawn was a bad omen for the day, a sign of misfortune in the forum. Your courtesan makes a discreet gesture with her fingers, warding it off, then whispers, "Better they than us." You shiver, remembering the little lamp skeleton still dancing silently in your pouch. Everywhere, traces of the feast ripple outward. A baker mutters about senators buying loaves on credit. A slave at a fountain whispers to another about seeing a courtesan leave the villa with more jewellery than she entered. Two men argue in the shadow of a temple over whether a promise made in wine still binds in daylight. And overhead, pigeons swoop, their wings flashing briefly like the fans of peacocks, living reminders of the absurd, shimmering night. By the time you near the forum, the city is fully awakened. Vendors shout prices. Advocates rehearse cases aloud. Statues of old generals glare down as if they, too, disapprove of ivy wreaths and leopard shows. Yet you sense the forum is just the next stage. What was whispered over wine will be argued here in marble. the feast transformed into law or rumour, decree or scandal. The villa is gone, but its ghost walks beside every senator who stumbles across these stones today. You pause at the edge of the square, the courtesan beside you. She adjusts her hairpin and murmurs, "Now the real games begin." She's right. The night was indulgence, but the morning is consequence, and Rome feeds on both with equal hunger. The sun is higher now, polishing the marble of the forum until it glitters too brightly for tired eyes. Senators file in with carefully arranged dignity, but the stagger in their steps betrays the truth. They move like actors rehearsing for a play they only half remember. Togas crisp, but minds still fogged with peacock fat and too much Falernian. Clients trail them like shadows, dutifully pretending that their patrons never wobbled. You follow the current, lamp tucked discreetly in your pouch, watching how the chaos of last night begins its transformation into history. This is where the editing begins, not in scrolls, not in marble inscriptions, but in voices. Hawknose, who poured wine over his own head like a fountain, now adjusts his toga and greets colleagues as if he had spent the evening in sober meditation. Marble Smile, who nearly forced us to kneel until collapse, now jokes gently with a magistrate about the virtues of moderation. Laurel Wreath, who shrieked hymns to Bacchus until his wreath slipped sideways, now quotes a line from Horace about balance, as though he embodies it. The forum is a stage, and their reputations are the play. Historical fact: Roman historians themselves often smoothed feasts into anecdotes or sharpened them into weapons. Tacitus, writing of Tiberius, suggested the emperor's retreats on Capri were soaked in depravity, but the details are half rumour, half moral lesson. Suetonius described Caligula's midnight revels with relish, embellishing where evidence thinned. Petronius, through the satire, painted Trimalchio's grotesque dinner not as exact history, but as caricature, yet audiences believed because it rang true. Later readers inherit these edited scripts, uncertain where laughter stops and memory begins. And the editing isn't just for posterity. Already gossip flickers like a torch in dry reeds. A group of younger senators whisper about how the governor of Asia drank himself under the couch. Another insists a certain lady reclined among the men, scandalous enough to fuel weeks of chatter. But names blur, titles shift. By the time the stories reach the baths tonight, they'll be sharper, dirtier, and perhaps entirely wrong. Memory is malleable clay, and Rome has sculptors everywhere. Quirky fact, some Romans even hired memorators, professional note-takers who followed them into public, recording deeds and sayings for later polish. Imagine the poor memorator at last night's feast, scribbling furiously as the parrot squawked obscenities and the leopard strained at its chain. How much will he keep? How much will he bury? Oh. Perhaps one day his notes become evidence, tidied until the chaos looks like wisdom. Your courtesan slips through the forum beside you, her veil modestly drawn now. She leans close, whispering, "Watch how they tell it. Truth never survives the morning." You look around and realise she's right. Each senator spins his own version before the marble columns. Some highlight witty verses, others recall only the philosophical corner. A few pretend they left before the frenzy began. The blood oath over broken cups? Forgotten. The whispered promises of governorships? Muted. The Bacchic mask? No one even breathes the word. A scholarly debate hums beneath the surface. How much of what we know about Roman feasts is moral invention? Livy's account of the Bacchanalia is lurid enough to read like propaganda, crafted to justify suppression. Juvenal's satires gleefully paint matrons drinking in secret, nobles feasting like beasts, emperors drowning in debauchery. Were these exaggerations to warn and entertain, or did they reflect realities so frequent they became clichés? Scholars still wrestle with it, torn between suspicion of bias and the nagging sense that exaggeration often grows from truth's seed. The domina who dared to recline last night walks past in daylight, her face calm, her step measured. No one comments, no one dares. What was scandal in shadows becomes silence in sun. You marvel at how quickly Rome forgets when forgetting is convenient. Yet the courtesan's eyes gleam knowingly. She'll remember, and so will others. Memory doesn't vanish. It migrates to quieter places, waiting. You pass a scribe hunched with wax tablet, listening as two magistrates swap lines about moderation. He records carefully. ignoring the way one of them still smells faintly of vomit. These are the words that will survive: restraint, dignity, unity. The feast itself will shrink into rumour, while the speeches harden into official record. History is happening right in front of you, and it's lying through its teeth. Quirky superstition circles back. A senator gestures toward the rostra and mutters about how he dreamed of an owl last night. His colleague reassures him, owls mean wisdom, not death. They argue over omens as if they hadn't just sung themselves hoarse to Bacchus hours ago. Rome's contradictions are relentless. You can't help but laugh softly, earning a nudge from your courtesan to stay quiet. As you move deeper into the forum, you see groups forming, little clusters of power. Deals whispered over wine last night now slip into careful phrasing here. The senator who boasted of Asia is suddenly lobbying a tribune. The one who drank blood with his neighbour is now standing shoulder to shoulder with him, voices lowered, the pact alive in daylight. Last night's play acting has become this morning's agenda. Open scholarly debate again. Historians puzzle over how much policy truly shifted in such informal spaces. Did the empire run on decrees or on dinners? Did provinces fall not to armies but to toasts? Some argue that the Senate's formal chambers mattered less than its informal gatherings, that marble records are the shadow and feasts the substance. Others resist the idea, fearing it makes Rome sound too human, too messy. But watching the forum this morning, you know which is truer. The courtesan draws your attention to the philosophers still lingering at the edge. The stoic, bread in hand, is already surrounded by a few earnest listeners, lecturing softly about moderation and virtue. The cynic lounges with his staff, laughing at everything, gathering a different kind of audience. Those who prefer mockery to guidance, both are already being folded into the city's memory. One as a sage, one as a jester. Neither will record the leopard, or the parrot, or the blood pact. Yet you know they remember, and perhaps, in their own way, they will tell. The host too arrives at the forum, immaculate again, smile polished, voice booming. He greets his clients, shakes hands with senators, and beams as though his feast was a paragon of Roman decorum. You watch him carefully, and for the first time you admire his skill. He's not merely a reveller. He's a director, shaping memory as deftly as he shaped last night's chaos. The leopard didn't escape, the blood wasn't spilled, the Bacchic mask was just a harmless flourish. Already history has been edited. Your courtesan whispers, and so the story changes. You think of your lamp skeleton, its tiny terracotta grin, and realise the philosophers were right. Memory is fragile, and you must be your own whisperer. Because if you leave it to the forum, the truth of last night will dissolve like spilled wine in the cracks of stone. By noon the forum glows white-hot, marble blazing like it wants to erase shadows entirely. Senators squint, clients fan themselves with hands, and business drones on as if last night's ivy never touched their brows. Yet you carry the night with you, the leopard's growl still ringing faintly in your chest, the parrot's obscene squawk rattling like a misplaced prophecy, the drumbeat of Bacchus echoing in your bones. Everyone here is pretending the city runs on law and marble, but you know it runs just as much on wine whispers and the theatre of appetite. You pause at the steps of a temple where petitioners cluster, each one clutching scrolls or grievances. The air smells of wax, sweat, and baking bread. A priest sprinkles incense onto a brazier, the smoke curling skyward, as if to remind Rome that the gods are watching. But you can't help but laugh softly, because if the gods were truly watching, they saw everything last night, and surely even Jupiter must be shaking his head. Historical fact to balance the humour: Roman religion was deeply intertwined with politics. Sacrifices and auguries weren't just ritual, they were justification, the stamp of divine approval on decisions. A bad omen could delay a vote, a sacrificed liver with a blemish could stall an entire campaign. Yet men who roared Bacchic chants at midnight now solemnly nod as sacred chickens are fed, pretending that they've always been paragons of piety. Hypocrisy wasn't a bug in the system, it was the system. Your courtesan tugs at your sleeve, drawing you into the shade of a portico. "Listen," she whispers. Beneath the hum of the crowd you hear it. Not drums, not flutes, but the scrape of stylus on wax. Scribae are already taking notes, recording speeches and votes, shaping the day into a record that will survive far longer than memories of last night's feast. This is where the night dies, not in silence, but in substitution. The leopard becomes a metaphor, the Bacchic chant a footnote, the courtesan's laughter erased entirely. The marble will remember restraint, the truth will slip into rumour, scattered like breadcrumbs for satirists to peck at centuries later. Quirky superstition rises again. A soothsayer in the Forum is crying that he saw lightning strike near the Aventine at dawn, an omen of disruption. Men shake their heads, some with fear, others with amusement. A few whisper about reforms, others about treason. You know how this city works. The omen will be bent whichever way suits the strongest voice. Maybe lightning really struck, maybe it didn't. By tomorrow no one will care. They'll care only what story was told about it. The scholarly debate on memory presses close now. Did Rome remember itself honestly? Or did it always live in a haze of selective editing, exaggeration, satire, moral panic, and propaganda? Historians still wrestle, some insisting the grotesque tales of feasts are caricature, others pointing to archaeological evidence, heaps of exotic animal bones in elite middens, imported spices in sewer drains, inscriptions of cult suppression, as proof that indulgence wasn't just rumour. You stand here in the noon heat and realise the answer doesn't matter. For Romans, truth was never the point. The story was. The Stoic passes you, headed for the shade of a basilica, his plain cloak fluttering slightly in the hot wind. He doesn't acknowledge you, but he doesn't need to. His lamp already rides in your pouch, its skeleton dancing every time you move. The cynic ambles the other way, staff tapping stone, laughing at the magistrate who has just dropped his wax tablet in the dust. Both philosophers are still here, their lessons intact. One whispers discipline, the other mockery, but both insist on memory, the only currency stronger than wine. Your courtesan stops and studies you. Her eyes are calmer now, but sharper too, like glass that has cooled from fire. "What will you tell?" she asks. It isn't a question about gossip, it's about choice. Do you join the others in rewriting, or do you carry the lamp's lesson and keep the night alive in all its contradictions? You think of the parrot, of the host's mercies disguised as wit, of the blood-tinged cup, of the owl that blinked at breakfast. You realise the feast is already fading, but the details cling if you choose to keep them. Historical quirk to seal the thought. In some Roman households, slaves called nomenclators whispered names into their masters' ears so they wouldn't forget clients' identities during the salutatio, memory outsourced, professionalised, commodified. Rome never trusted itself to remember without scaffolding. You feel suddenly protective of your own memory, fragile though it is, because no one else will keep it intact. The Forum hums louder, echoing with speeches, the clatter of sandals, the scratch of stotletons. Life surges forward, Rome devours another day, and the villa behind you is already dissolving into rumour. Yet in your pouch the little lamp skeleton grins, oil faintly scented with myrtle, and you realise you've carried out the only souvenir that matters. Not the jewellery, not the gossip, not the boast, but the reminder. Everything ends, even feasts, even power, even Rome. You walk on, your courtesan beside you, her bangles chiming lightly, her veil fluttering in the hot breeze. Behind you, senators rehearse lies polished enough to last a generation. Ahead of you, the streets teem with bakers, smiths, beggars, lovers, children chasing hoops. Somewhere, another feast is already being planned, another night of wine and whispers and half-forgotten truth. The cycle will turn again. But you have this lamp, this memory, this story, and you suspect, though you won't admit it loud, that someday, when Rome itself is rubble and ivy, someone else will sit by torchlight telling tales of forbidden feasts and orgies of the Senate, half rumour, half truth, and entirely Rome. Later, when the sun goes soft and the city's clang thins to a lull, you find a quiet corner and set the little clay lamp on a windowsill. The skeleton on its belly looks like it's mid-two-step, forever reminding you that nights end, even when they pretend not to. You breathe in dust, bread, and a ghost of myrrh from your hair, and it hits you how strange it is to feel both heavier and lighter. You have carried a leopard's growl, a parrot's joke, a senator's oath that tasted like rust, and somehow your pockets are empty enough to sleep. You unspool the night the way a servant shakes a cloth. Feathers, ivy, laughter. The drum that taught your ribs a rhythm, the dominor's veil like a line drawn in saffron. The host's mercies, small, strategic, real, float up like crumbs of light. The courtesan's bells fade into the hum of carts, and Hawknose shrinks to a sketch on wax. Rome keeps its two faces, marble by noon, myrtle by midnight, You've met both, you'll remember both. Outside, a breeze noses the curtain, and the city sighs through 1,000 open shutters. You picture the threshold lion, Priapus's carved smirk, the dolphins in mosaic surf. You picture the philosophers in their corner, one offering olives, the other a grin that could cut rope. A better lullaby than flutes, honestly. You pinch the lamp's wick to a glow, then to nothing. In the dark behind your eyelids, the feast reassembles once more, gentler now, a round table, wine diluted with water, bread passed by steady hands. Someone says Evo, but softly, like a blessing. Someone else answers, remember, and it lands like a quilt. You stretch amused and a little wiser, and let the city rock you the last inch into sleep.